Hey there, night listeners. Welcome. Tonight you're invited into a world where the lines between crime and the unexplained quietly blur. These stories are dark, true, and touched by something otherworldly. Let them unfold in the quiet of your room as you drift deeper into the shadows of sleep. If you find comfort in the strange, the eerie, and the softly chilling, consider subscribing so you'll never drift off alone again. Now close your eyes and let's begin. Story 1. The Possessed Killer. My name is Malcolm Reeves. 16 years with the Haverbrook Police Department, 13 of those in homicide. What I'm about to share was never meant for official records. This is my attempt to process the Anders Blackwood case, an investigation that changed everything I thought I knew about our world. I've always considered myself rational. Evidence, facts, tangible pieces that build a case. These were my religion. The supernatural existed only in movies and ghost stories told around campfires. But some cases carve themselves into your soul, forcing you to question the very nature of reality. The Blackwood case didn't just change my career, it altered how I perceive existence itself. It began on a rain-soaked Tuesday in October. The call came in just before noon. A postal worker had discovered a body after noticing mail piling up at an apartment on Willow Street. I remember the drive over, windshield wipers keeping steady time, like a metronome counting down to the moment my worldview would shatter. Victoria Harding, 27, lay in the center of her living room. Her arms were extended outward, palms facing upward in a grotesque welcoming gesture. A perfect circle of unlit black candles surrounded her body. But what truly caught my attention were the symbols drawn on the floor in what appeared to be a mixture of ash and the victim's blood. Concentric circles containing geometric patterns and text in a language I didn't recognize. Standing there, rainwater still dripping from my coat onto the apartment's carpet, I felt something I'd never experienced at a crime scene before. A heaviness in the air, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I dismissed it as sleep deprivation, a consequence of the triple homicide case I'd just closed the week before. Dr. Simmons, our medical examiner, placed time of death between 2 and 3 days prior. Cause of death, exsanguination from multiple lacerations. But the patterns of these cuts disturbed me, methodical, precise, forming shapes across her torso that corresponded to the symbols on the floor. Not the frenzied work of a passionate killer, but something calculated, ritualistic. No sign of forced entry, no defensive wounds. Victoria had welcomed her killer. 3 days later, Thomas Mercer, 32, was found in his downtown loft. Same positioning, same symbols, same ritualistic elements. The only difference was the addition of small mirrors placed at each cardinal direction around the body. Walking through his apartment, I felt that same oppressive heaviness, stronger this time, like walking through invisible cobwebs that clung to my skin long after I'd left the scene. That night, I dreamt of mirrors and whispers. I woke at 3:33 a.m., drenched in sweat, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of my bed. The digital clock's red numbers burned in the darkness like eyes. The break in the case came when a neighbor of the second victim mentioned seeing a man leaving Mercer's building the night of the murder. Blank-faced, like he was sleepwalking, he'd said, but managed to get a partial plate number. This led us to Anders Blackwood, 34, an antiquarian book dealer with no prior criminal record. Blackwood's apartment felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Books on occult practices lined the walls, their leather spines seeming to watch us as we moved through the rooms. In his bedroom stood a large antique mirror, its ornate frame carved with the same symbols found at both crime scenes. My reflection looked distorted somehow, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. I avoided looking at it directly as we continued our search. His journals revealed an obsession with something called the reflective passage, an ancient ritual involving mirrors that supposedly open doorways between realms. The most recent entries grew increasingly erratic, sometimes switching between handwriting styles mid-sentence. The final entry, dated the day before the first murder, read only, "It shows me what must be done. The door opens both ways." We brought Blackwood in that evening. I'll never forget the moment he entered the interrogation room. There was something about his eyes, a vacancy that made my skin crawl. Not the defensive posture of most killers, nor the manic energy of the unhinged. Just emptiness. When I asked if he knew why he was there, he stared at me for a full minute before responding. "Because of what I did," he said finally. Or rather, what was done using me. He claimed he'd acquired the mirror from an estate sale 3 weeks prior. While cataloguing it, he'd recited an inscription on the back frame, and something had happened. The mirror's surface changed, becoming like black water. Something had come through, he said, entering his body and pushing his consciousness aside. "I've had blackouts since then," he told us, tears running down his face. "I wake up in strange places, with blood on my hands. I've heard every excuse imaginable from killers trying to distance themselves from their crimes. Multiple personalities, voices commanding them, temporary insanity. But something in Blackwood's demeanor unsettled me. The genuine terror in his eyes when he spoke of the entity that had possessed him. It didn't feel like an act. "It's creating a door," he'd whispered, leaning forward. "The symbols, the positioning, it's preparing for something bigger." I dismissed his claims as elaborate fiction. The evidence was clear, his fingerprints at both scenes, the victim's blood in his apartment, the journals documenting his descent into delusion. Open and shut case. At least that's what I told myself as I drove home that night, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread settling in my stomach. That night, I dreamt I was standing before Blackwood's mirror. In the reflection, I saw not myself, but a cavernous darkness stretching infinitely backward. Something moved in that darkness, approaching slowly. I woke gasping just as it reached the glass. The following day, while reviewing the interview footage, my partner Chen noticed something strange in the audio. When isolated and enhanced, we could hear whispers beneath Blackwood's voice, speaking in what language specialists later identified as ancient Akkadian. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Audio contamination, a technical glitch. But then came the incident in Blackwood's cell. The security footage showed him kneeling in the center of his cell, apparently speaking to an empty corner. The lights flickered, and when the video feed resumed after 12 seconds of interference, his bed had moved 3 feet from its bolted position. The mirror-polished steel of his sink was covered in condensation, with what looked like handprints visible. And Blackwood stood facing the wall, arms extended outward in the same position as the victims. The officers who checked on him found the cell temperature at 52 degrees Fahrenheit, significantly lower than the rest of the block. Blackwood himself was unconscious and remained unresponsive for 6 hours. Upon waking, he claimed to have no memory of the incident. I visited him again the next day. Something had changed in him, a calmness that hadn't been there before, almost peaceful. "It's getting stronger," he told me without prompting. "The more it takes me, the stronger it becomes." Then he mentioned a name, Sophia Lynch, a woman he claimed not to know, though his cellmate reported hearing him repeat that name in his sleep. When I pressed him about it, his demeanor shifted suddenly. His voice became eerily calm as he recited her address. "She lives on Oakwood Drive, number 117. Alone. It likes when they're alone." Then, just as quickly, confusion returned to his face. He had no recollection of having spoken those words. My instinct screamed that something was profoundly wrong. I dispatched officers to the address immediately. They found Sophia Lynch alive, but in the process of setting up black candles in her living room. She had no explanation for her actions, claiming she felt compelled to arrange them. A search of her home revealed she had recently purchased an antique hand mirror from Blackwood's shop. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every reflective surface in my apartment seemed to be watching me. I covered the mirrors with towels, telling myself I was being ridiculous, that the strain of the case was getting to me. But the dreams returned, more vivid this time. Dark corridors of fractured reflections where something pursued me, always just out of sight. I requested to have the antique mirror from Blackwood's apartment brought to the station for examination. Dr. Eleanor Wright from the university's anthropology department arrived to assist. As she examined the inscriptions on the frame, the overhead lights flickered briefly. When they stabilized, I saw something impossible in the mirror's surface. Not the evidence room where we stood, but a vast, cavernous space, and far back in that impossible distance stood a figure, watching us. Dr. Wright saw it too. She dropped her equipment and fled the room. Later, she refused to return, saying only, "That's not a mirror. It's a window." That evening, I reviewed the security footage from the evidence room. At exactly 3:33 a.m., with no one present, the mirror fell from its secured position to face directly toward the camera. For 12 seconds, the feed distorted. When it cleared, the mirror was back in its original position. When I examined it afterward, I found a single handprint on its surface, too large to be human. Sleep became my enemy. In my dreams, I wandered through halls of mirrors where my reflection never quite matched my movements. I would wake gasping at 3:33 a.m. each night, convinced someone stood in the darkest corner of my bedroom. Once, I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from my bathroom mirror. The case took an even darker turn when we found a list in Blackwood's apartment. 5 names. Victoria Harding and Thomas Mercer were the first 2. Sophia Lynch was third, followed by Robert Walsh and Catherine Delaney. The list was in Blackwood's handwriting, though he vehemently denied creating it when confronted. "You don't understand," he'd said, genuine terror in his eyes. "It doesn't need me anymore. I was just the doorway. It's already partly here." Despite placing protective details on Walsh and Delaney, Robert Walsh was found dead the next evening, positioned kneeling before his bathroom mirror, arms extended outward, surrounded by the same ritualistic elements. The mirror was shattered, with shards arranged in a pattern around his body. The most disturbing detail: Walsh had died at 10:30 p.m., during which time Anders Blackwood was in a secured cell under constant surveillance 13 miles away. I visited Blackwood one last time the following morning. He seemed different, resigned, almost peaceful. "It's almost complete," he told me without prompting. "The reflections are thinning. Soon they'll break entirely." When I asked what he meant, He smiled sadly. "Look in any mirror tonight, detective. You'll see it too. You'll see what's been watching from the other side all along." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "It was never about the killing, detective. The deaths were just the pattern. The real ritual was what it learned from me. How to navigate in your world. How to exist outside of reflection." I almost dismissed it as the ramblings of a delusional mind. But as I was gathering my files, one of the junior officers rushed in with news that Catherine Delaney, the fifth name on the list, had just been found dead in her home, positioned like the others, surrounded by mirrors. Anders Blackwood had been in isolated custody for the past 48 hours. There was no possible way he could have committed this murder. And yet, the pattern continued. That night, as I washed my face before bed, I saw something in my bathroom mirror that stopped my heart. A face behind my reflection, just for a moment. A face that looked like Anders Blackwood's, but wrong somehow, distorted, with eyes that held nothing human. I smashed the mirror with my bare hands, heedless of the lacerations that opened across my knuckles. The phone rang as I stood there, bleeding into the sink. It was the psychiatric facility where we'd transferred Blackwood. He was dead, throat slashed, though he'd had no access to anything sharp. His final act had been to write something on the wall in his own blood. 5 doors open, it walks free. The coroner estimated time of death at exactly the same moment I'd seen that face in my mirror. I'm writing this from a motel room where I've covered every reflective surface. I've submitted my resignation from the department. Tomorrow, I'm leaving Haverbrook, though some part of me knows distance won't matter. Not anymore. The most terrifying realization isn't that something supernatural may have been responsible for these deaths. It's the possibility that Anders Blackwood was telling the truth all along, that something used him to gain access to our world and is now here, moving freely among us. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear those whispers from the interview room. And sometimes, just at the edge of my vision, I catch glimpses of someone watching me from reflective surfaces, someone wearing Anders Blackwood's face like an ill-fitting mask. And I can't help but wonder, was Anders Blackwood ever the killer at all? Or was he just the first victim of something that has only begun its work in our world? Last night, I dreamt I stood before a vast mirror that showed not my reflection, but countless faces pressed against the glass from the other side. Faces contorted in silent screams. And walking among them, touching each one with long, spindly fingers, was a figure that turned to look at me with my own face. "The door opens both ways," it said with my mouth. "We've always been here, watching, and now, we're coming through." I woke to find myself standing before the bathroom mirror I'd covered with a sheet. The sheet lay on the floor at my feet. My reflection smiled at me, though I wasn't smiling. And behind me in the reflection, just for a moment, I swear I saw Anders Blackwood, his eyes black and endless, mouthing 2 words: "Your turn." Story 2. The Haunted Evidence Locker. From the personal case notes of Detective Elijah Mercer, Milford County Sheriff's Department. I've served in the Milford County Sheriff's Department for 17 years. In a town of barely 5,000 people, we mostly deal with drunk drivers, domestic disputes, and the occasional break-in at the pharmacy by kids looking for pills. Nothing in my training prepared me for what began 3 months ago with the Alderman case. I'm documenting these events against department protocol, but I need to maintain some record of what's happening. If anything should happen to me, at least someone might understand. It started with the discovery at the old Alderman property on Creek Road. A hiker reported seeing strange lights in the abandoned house around 2 a.m. on October 17th. Deputy Collins and I responded, expecting teenagers with flashlights or maybe squatters. What we found changed everything. The smell hit us first, copper and decay mixed with something chemical I couldn't place. The living room floor had been cleared of furniture, and a large circle drawn in what the lab later confirmed was a mixture of animal blood, ash, and quicksilver. 5 black candles marked points around the circle, and at its center lay the body of Marcus Vaughn, a drifter who'd been seen around town for a few weeks prior. The cause of death wasn't immediately apparent. No gunshot wounds or stab injuries. His body was positioned with arms outstretched, palms up, like an offering. Later, the medical examiner would determine he died from some kind of toxic exposure, though she couldn't identify the specific agent. His blood contained unknown compounds that made her nervous enough to call in a hazmat team. But the strangest elements were the symbols, carved into the floorboards around the circle, painted on the walls in a red-brown substance, and even cut into Vaughn's skin in precise surgical patterns. They didn't match any known gang signs, occult symbols, or religious iconography in our databases. When I photographed them, several of my digital images corrupted. The symbols that did appear in photos seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. A trick of the light, I told myself. We collected everything according to protocol. The candles, samples of the circle material, Vaughn's personal effects, and a small wooden box found clutched in his hand. The box was ornately carved with the same symbols from the scene, and contained what appeared to be human teeth, small bones, and a folded piece of parchment covered in handwritten text in an unidentifiable language. Evidence technician Jerry Porter handled the logging and storage of all items in our secure evidence room. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Within 24 hours, Porter called in sick with severe migraines. He hasn't returned to work since. I didn't connect Porter's absence to the case until the nightmares began. First for Collins, who responded with me. Then for Sheila in dispatch, who handled the evidence paperwork. Then me. In my dreams, I stood in that circle at the Alderman house, but I wasn't alone. Something watched from every corner of the room, something I could feel but never quite see directly. When I would turn to look, it would shift just outside my peripheral vision. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater, and always those symbols pulsing with a dim light, seeming to float off the surfaces they were carved into. I'd wake gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. For several nights I dismissed it as stress, the natural response to a disturbing crime scene. We see things in this job that the mind needs time to process. 2 weeks after securing the evidence, Officer Dawkins was conducting routine inventory in the evidence locker when he noticed something odd. Moisture seeping from the sealed evidence boxes containing items from the Alderman scene. When he opened the main box to check for leaks, he found the same symbols from the crime scene now etched into the inside of the box lid. The symbols hadn't been there when the evidence was logged. I had personally inspected every item. Dawkins reported it immediately. The chief dismissed it as contamination, suggesting the symbols had been there all along but overlooked in the initial inventory. I knew better. I had photographed the empty boxes before storage, standard procedure in unusual cases. Those symbols were new. That night, reviewing the security footage from the evidence room, I noticed a gap, 17 minutes missing from the digital record, precisely during the overnight shift when no one should have accessed the room. The system showed no errors, no signs of tampering. Those minutes had simply vanished. I kept this information to myself initially. In a department this small, in a town where everyone knows everyone's business, I couldn't risk causing panic based on what might be nothing more than a technical glitch and an overactive imagination. 3 days later, Deputy Collins approached me in the break room, his face pale, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "You're having them too, aren't you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The dreams about the circle." I admitted I was. We compared notes. His nightmares mirrored mine, with one addition. He kept seeing a figure standing in the center of the circle where Vaughn's body had been, its back to him. When the figure would begin to turn, Collins would wake up. That same afternoon, Officer Martinez, who had never been to the Alderman scene and had no contact with the evidence, reported hearing whispering coming from the evidence room while walking past. When she unlocked the door to investigate, the sound stopped. She found no one inside, but noticed the temperature was at least 10 degrees colder than the rest of the station. I decided to review the Alderman case files again, looking for anything we might have missed. The background check on Vaughn revealed little. A history of petty crimes in various states, no fixed address, no known family. But in his personal effects was a journal containing references to the summoning and opening the way. Most entries were incoherent ramblings, but one page contained a clear warning. The artifacts must remain separated. If stored together, they will find each other. They will wake what sleeps. A chill ran down my spine as I read those words. We had collected everything together, stored it all in the same evidence room, barely 30 feet from where I sat reading his warning. That night, working late, I heard it myself, a soft scratching sound coming from the direction of the evidence room. Following protocol, I drew my weapon before investigating. The room was secured, locked as it should be. When I unlocked it and switched on the lights, nothing seemed amiss. But as I moved between the shelves, I noticed the temperature dropping dramatically. My breath fogged in front of me by the time I reached the section containing the Alderman evidence. The box had moved. I'm certain of it. It had been placed on the third shelf, but now sat on the second. The evidence tag was intact, the seal unbroken, yet somehow it had been relocated. As I reached to examine it, the scratching sound returned, coming from inside the box. My training told me to back away, call for backup. Instead, I found myself reaching for the seal. Something compelled me to open it, a pull I couldn't resist. The air around me felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Inside, the items were arranged differently than when we'd packed them. The candles formed a miniature circle. The wooden box of teeth and bones sat in the center. And on the inside lid of the evidence box, freshly carved, was a new symbol, larger and more complex than the others, still wet with what looked like blood, but couldn't possibly be. I slammed the box shut, heart pounding. As I turned to leave, the lights flickered. In that brief moment of darkness, I felt something brush past me. Cold, like walking through a freezer doorway. When the light stabilized, I was alone, but the sensation of being watched was overwhelming. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Chief Hansen. I explained my concerns, the missing footage, the rearranged evidence, the shared nightmares among officers who had contact with the case. I suggested we transfer the evidence to the state crime lab, get it out of our station. "You need sleep, Mercer," he said, concern evident in his voice. "This case has everybody on edge, but we can't start buying into superstitious nonsense. The state lab already has samples. They'll contact us when they have results." I didn't mention the symbol I'd seen inside the box or the scratching sounds. Even to my own ears, it would have sounded delusional. That afternoon, reviewing case notes at my desk, I noticed something in the crime scene photos I hadn't seen before. In the background of one image, partially visible through the doorway to the kitchen, was a mirror. And reflected in that mirror, standing in what should have been an empty room, was a figure, tall, unnaturally thin, its features blurred. I checked other photos taken from different angles. The kitchen had been empty. I asked Dr. Morris, RME, to review Vaughn's autopsy results again, specifically looking for any unusual findings beyond the unknown toxins. Her call came late that evening. "The cuts on his body," she said, her voice tense. "I initially thought they were made with a scalpel or similar sharp instrument, but looking at the tissue samples again. Elijah, these wounds were made from the inside out. Whatever carved those symbols did it from beneath his skin." Sleep became impossible after that conversation. When exhaustion finally claimed me around dawn, the nightmare returned. The circle, the presence just out of sight. But this time, Collins's figure stood in the center. It began to turn, and I saw its face, not human, not anything I could fully comprehend. Its features seemed to shift and flow, but its eyes remained fixed. Black pools that reflected nothing. It raised a hand toward me, and on its palm was the same symbol I'd seen inside the evidence box. I woke to my phone ringing. Collins hadn't shown up for his shift, wasn't answering calls. I volunteered to check on him. His apartment door was unlocked. The living room was empty of furniture, the floor covered with the same symbols from the Alderman house, drawn in what appeared to be black paint. Collins sat in the center of a freshly drawn circle, staring at nothing, mouth moving in silent words. He didn't respond to his name, didn't seem to register my presence at all. When paramedics arrived, he became violent, requiring restraint. At the hospital, he was diagnosed with acute psychosis. The doctors found no drugs in his system, no physical cause for his condition. That night, returning to the station after visiting Collins, I found Chief Hansen reviewing the security footage from the evidence room. "You need to see this," he said, his skepticism finally shaken. The footage showed the evidence room at 3:17 a.m. No one entered, but the Alderman box visibly moved on its own, sliding from one shelf to another. As we watched, the image distorted, pixelating around the box. When it cleared, the box had opened itself, its contents now arranged in the pattern I had discovered. "We're moving this evidence tomorrow," Hansen said, no longer dismissing my concerns. "State police can take it to their secure facility." But it was already too late. That night, every officer on duty reported hearing whispers from the evidence room. The lights throughout the station flickered continuously. 3 separate 911 calls came in from civilians reporting strange lights at the station. The temperature dropped so severely that pipes burst in the walls. I was home when the call came, a fire at the station. By the time I arrived, smoke poured from the windows. The source, the evidence room. Despite the sprinkler system activating, the fire had consumed most of the room's contents. Strangely, the only evidence untouched by the flames was the Alderman box, sitting perfectly intact in the center of the scorched room. The fire inspector found no obvious ignition source. The electrical system had been updated the previous year, and there were no flammable chemicals stored nearby. The pattern of the burn, he noted, was unusual. It radiated outward from a central point, as if the fire had started in mid-air. In the chaos of the fire and its aftermath, a decision was made. Chief Hansen personally took the Alderman evidence to be transported to the state facility. He never arrived. His vehicle was found abandoned at the county line, the evidence missing, no sign of Hansen himself. 3 days later, hikers reported strange lights at the Alderman property again. This time I went alone. I know procedure dictated backup, but something told me this was now between me and whatever had attached itself to our department. The same pull that had drawn me to open that evidence box now drew me back to where it all began. The house stood silent in the moonlight. The front door swung open at my touch, though I distinctly remembered securing it with a padlock after the initial investigation. Inside, the living room was exactly as we had found it that first night. The circle redrawn, candles in position, as if the crime scene had never been processed. In the center stood Chief Hansen, his back to me, arms outstretched just as Vaughan's had been. At his feet sat the wooden box of teeth and bones, open now, the parchment unfolded beside it. "Chief," I called, my voice sounding muffled in the thick air. He turned slowly. His eyes were black voids, his skin gray and waxy. When he spoke, his voice overlapped with something else, something deeper, resonating from somewhere beyond him. "We needed a gateway," the voice said through Hansen's mouth. "A keeper of keys and locked places, someone with authority over thresholds." I realized with horror what Vaughan had been attempting in his ritual, what had gone wrong, and what was now being completed using Hansen. The evidence hadn't been cursed. It had been a lure, a trap for someone with specific qualities needed for whatever was trying to come through. As Hansen spoke, the symbols on the floor began to glow with a pale blue light. The temperature plummeted until my breath crystallized in front of me. Through the doorway to the kitchen, I could see the mirror I'd noticed in the crime scene photo. In its reflection, the room was different, darker, filled with shifting shadows that had no source in our reality. The evidence locker was perfect. Hansen's voice continued, the other voice becoming more dominant. A place of contained power, of items imbued with emotion and violence. A battery collecting energy until we could use it. I reached for my weapon, but my arm wouldn't respond. My body felt leaden, immobile. The symbols pulsed brighter with each of Hansen's words. In the mirror's reflection, the shadows were taking form. Tall, thin figures moving toward the reflective surface, as if approaching a window. "You were so helpful, Detective," the voice said. "Your fear, your doubt, your curiosity, all strengthened the connection. Every time you entered that room, touched those objects, you fed it. Every nightmare shared among your colleagues widened the crack between worlds." The candles ignited simultaneously without being touched. The light they cast was wrong, too blue, too cold. The symbols on the floor began to move, sliding across the wooden boards like living things, rearranging into a new pattern that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Hansen's body convulsed, back arching at an impossible angle. From his mouth poured a black, oily substance that pooled on the floor, flowing toward the center of the circle. As it reached the wooden box, the substance began to rise, taking shape, a column of darkness that gradually assumed a vaguely humanoid form. In that moment, my paralysis broke. Training took over, and I fired at the shape rising from the circle. The bullets passed through it without effect, striking the wall behind. The figure continued to form, growing more solid with each passing second. Hansen collapsed to the floor, empty now, discarded. I had one desperate idea. The journal had warned that the artifacts needed to remain separated. If bringing them together had opened this doorway, perhaps destroying them could close it. I lunged for the wooden box at the center of the circle. The air felt thick as molasses, every movement requiring immense effort. The temperature had dropped so severely that frost formed on my skin as I moved. The figure reached for me with limbs that seemed too numerous, too fluid to count. My hand closed around the box. The cold burned like fire, the wood seeming to writhe under my grip as if alive. With all my strength, I threw it into the fireplace against the far wall, then fired my remaining rounds at it. The dry wood ignited immediately. As flames consumed the box, an inhuman howl filled the room, not from the figure before me, but from everywhere at once, as if the house itself was screaming. The symbols on the floor began to fade. The figure lost cohesion, its form collapsing like smoke in a strong wind. Through the kitchen doorway, I saw the mirror crack, then shatter into dust. The candles extinguished simultaneously. Darkness fell, complete and absolute. I don't know how long I lay there, semi-conscious in the dark. When I finally managed to switch on my flashlight, the room was empty. No circle, no symbols, no Hansen. Just an abandoned living room covered in dust and the remnants of the wooden box in the fireplace, burned beyond recognition. The official report states that Chief Hansen suffered a psychotic break due to stress, destroyed evidence related to the Vaughan case, and remains missing, presumed dead by his own hand. The fire at the station was attributed to electrical failure. Vaughan's death was ruled accidental exposure to an unknown toxin, likely from his own experimentation with homemade drugs. No one talks about the nightmares anymore. No one mentions the symbols that sometimes appear, scratched into bathroom mirrors or drawn in condensation on windows. No one discusses the cold spots that persist throughout the station, or the whispers sometimes heard from empty rooms. Collins was released from psychiatric care after 2 months, with no memory of what happened in his apartment. He transferred to another department 3 states away. 4 other officers have resigned. Porter, our evidence technician, remains on indefinite medical leave, now diagnosed with a rare form of early-onset dementia. I stay because someone needs to remember, to watch for the signs. I've studied everything I could find on occult rituals, dimensional gateways, entities that exist beyond our perception. The more I learn, the more I understand what Vaughan was attempting and what nearly succeeded. Sometimes, walking past the rebuilt evidence room late at night, I still hear scratching from inside. Sometimes, I dream of that circle, of symbols rearranging themselves, of a door slowly opening to something waiting on the other side. Last week, a hiker reported strange lights at the abandoned Wilson property on the other side of the county. I volunteered to check it out. The chief, our new chief, wanted to send backup. I insisted on going alone. I know what I'll find there. I know what's starting again. Whatever came through hasn't gone back. It's just gathering strength, learning, adapting. And this time, I don't think burning a wooden box will be enough to stop it. The evidence isn't haunted. We are. It found us, marked us, changed us. The station was never the container. We were. We are. Every nightmare, every whispered conversation, every fearful glance at the evidence room door has fed it. We became the evidence locker for something that doesn't belong in our world. And I'm the only one who still remembers what really happened. The only one who knows what to look for. The only one who might be able to stop it from completing what it started. At least that's what I tell myself as I drive toward the Wilson property, my headlights cutting through the darkness. But deep down, I know the truth. I'm not going there to stop anything. I'm going because it's calling me. Because even now, I can feel those symbols burning beneath my skin, rearranging themselves inside me. Because when I look in my rearview mirror, my reflection smiles back with eyes that aren't my own. And I can't help but wonder, was I ever really alone when I wrote these case notes? Or was something watching over my shoulder all along, learning our procedures, our protocols, our weaknesses? If you're reading this, it's already too late. Check your evidence room. Check for symbols appearing where they shouldn't be. Listen for whispers in empty rooms. But most importantly, don't trust the mirrors. What looks back at you isn't always what it seems. Story 3. The File That Writes Itself. I was never one to believe in ghosts. 23 years on the force had taught me that evil needed no supernatural explanation. The worst crimes I'd seen were committed by people, regular people with darkness hiding behind ordinary faces. Men who'd smile at you in the grocery store after burying bodies in their basements. Women who'd bake cookies for the neighborhood kids while slowly poisoning their husbands. Human monsters, all of them. perfectly explainable, but Case File 471B changed everything. They call cases like these cold for a reason. The trail freezes over, witnesses' memories crystallize into something brittle and unreliable, and evidence turns to dust in cardboard boxes. I was a month from retirement when Captain Reeves dropped the file on my desk. The 1997 Franklin murder. A 58-year-old history professor found in her office with her throat cut, arranged like a doll with her hands folded across her chest. "Take another look, Maddox," Reeves had said, the overhead fluorescence highlighting the gray in his beard. "Her son's in politics now. State senator. Election year coming up, and he wants to show he can close old wounds. Might do the department some good." I nodded, not telling him the closure was a myth we sold to families. Some wounds never heal. They just scab over. After 23 years in homicide, I'd grown tired of pretending otherwise. "Why me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because you're the best cold case detective I've got," he said, then added with a half smile, "and because everyone else is busy with that triple homicide downtown." I'd known Marcus Franklin, the son. Not well, but I remembered him from the initial investigation. A composed man in his 30s, clearly grieving but maintaining dignity during the interviews. His eyes had been calculating even then, like someone weighing how this tragedy might reshape his world. The storage room in the basement of the precinct smelled of mildew and forgotten promises when I retrieved the original file. Dust motes swirled in the beam of my flashlight, dancing like they were alive. I should have noticed then how they seemed to follow me, how they clustered around the box labeled 471-B as if drawn to it, how the air felt several degrees colder around that particular shelf. That first night, I spread the contents across my dining room table. Crime scene photos in faded color, witness statements, forensic reports that led nowhere. Dr. Eleanor Franklin's face stared up at me, faculty portrait next to morgue photos I couldn't look at for long. She had been a distinguished-looking woman, silver hair cut in a practical bob, intelligent eyes behind rimless glasses, the kind of woman who commanded respect, who shaped young minds. Until someone decided otherwise. The autopsy report was clinical in its depiction of horror. Single laceration across the throat, severing the carotid artery. Death would have been quick, at least. Small mercies, no signs of sexual assault, few defensive wounds. She likely knew her attacker, had trusted them enough to get close. Her body had been posed post-mortem, hands folded across her chest, legs straightened, hair arranged neatly. The original detectives had followed the usual suspects. The ex-husband, solid alibi. The department rival, questionable character but verifiable whereabouts. The graduate student she'd recently failed, interviewed twice, nothing conclusive. 3 individuals with records of violence against women in the area, all cleared. The case had gone nowhere. No murder weapon, no usable DNA, no witnesses who saw anything unusual that night. I worked until my eyes burned, making notes of inconsistencies, possible leads never fully explored. My coffee went cold beside me, the apartment silent except for the occasional creak of the old building settling. At 2 a.m., I finally gave up, sliding everything back into the manila folder before falling into bed, not bothering to change out of my clothes. The next morning, something was different. I couldn't place it at first, just a feeling that hung in the air like static before a storm. My apartment seemed slightly altered, as if someone had moved every piece of furniture an inch to the left. The coffee mug I could have sworn I'd left by the sink sat on top of the file. When I opened the folder, a yellow post-it note marked a witness statement I didn't remember seeing. Check alibi for Hargrove again. Security guard says he returned to campus that night. My handwriting, but I hadn't written it. I studied the note, turning it over in my hands. The paper was fresh, not aged like the rest of the file. James Hargrove was the department chair at the time, interviewed twice but never seriously considered. His alibi had been solid: dinner with colleagues until 10 p.m., then home to his wife. Could I have written this note in my exhaustion and forgotten? I chalked it up to fatigue. Retirement couldn't come soon enough. My ex-wife Marie had always said the job would eat me alive if I let it. Maybe that's why she left 3 years ago, taking our daughter Sophie to Portland. "I'm tired of competing with dead people," she'd said while packing. "Tired of that look you get when you're working a case, like you're not really here anymore." I poured myself another coffee and dove back into the file. The witness statement from Hargrove seemed ordinary enough. Claimed he was at a faculty dinner until 10 p.m., then went straight home. Nothing suspicious. But now, I found myself focusing on the security guard's log from that night. Mentions of a faculty member entering the humanities building around 11:30 p.m. The name wasn't noted. It hadn't seemed significant at the time. But then things got worse. I'd leave the file organized one way, return to find papers rearranged. I'd finish reading a report, set it down, only to pick it up later and find new paragraphs, details that couldn't possibly have been there before. After a week, I found a photograph I knew wasn't part of the original case file. It showed Dr. Franklin's office late at night, desk lamp casting long shadows. Nothing remarkable except for what looked like the shadow of a person in the doorway. Too elongated, too dark for the ambient light. Something about it made my skin crawl. The unnatural thinness of it, how it seemed to bend in places a human shadow shouldn't. I called the evidence clerk, a fastidious man named Harrington who'd been managing the department's files longer than I'd been a detective. "Was anything added to the Franklin file recently?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "No, Detective Maddox. That box hasn't been touched in years until you checked it out. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering if the family might have contributed additional materials." "Not through official channels," he said. "Is something missing?" "No," I replied. "The opposite, actually." That night, the lights in my apartment flickered while I reviewed witness statements. Off, on, like someone flipping a switch, but with a pattern almost like Morse code. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The maintenance guy found nothing wrong with the wiring. "Old building," he shrugged. "Probably need to update the whole system." I noticed other things too. The temperature in my apartment would drop suddenly, my breath fogging in front of me for a few seconds before returning to normal. Objects weren't where I left them. My keys moving from the hook by the door to inside the refrigerator. My badge appearing in the bathroom sink when I was sure I'd left it on my nightstand. 2 weeks in, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to find myself sitting at my dining table, the Franklin file open before me. I had no memory of getting out of bed. My fingers were smudged with ink, and a crime scene sketch lay under my hand. But something was wrong with it. The body's position had changed, arms now sprawled outward instead of folded neatly across the chest. I blinked, and for a moment, I swore the pencil marks shifted under my gaze, the woman's fingers seeming to twitch. I slammed the file shut. The apartment felt different, heavier somehow. In the corner of my eye, shadows moved where they shouldn't. When I turned to look directly, they stilled, but I could feel them watching, waiting for me to look away again. "Get it together, Maddox," I whispered to myself, but my voice sounded foreign in the darkness, as if someone else were speaking through me. Sleep became nearly impossible after that night. I began recording everything, taking photos of how I left the file each night, documenting every page with my phone before going to bed. I even set up an old video camera pointed at my dining table, though the footage showed nothing but static during the hours when the changes seemed to occur. The evidence was undeniable. Things were changing. New witness statements appeared, describing a figure watching Dr. Franklin in the weeks before her death. Crime scene photos showed footprints that previous reports never mentioned. Size 11 men's Oxford shoes, a distinctive wear pattern on the heel, and most disturbing, notes in my own handwriting that I had no memory of writing. "He's still out there. He knows you're looking. Check the manuscript archive in the university basement. I wasn't the first. Don't turn around." One morning, I found myself standing in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. I barely recognized the man looking back at me, sunken eyes rimmed with purple, cheeks hollow, skin sallow. I'd lost weight without noticing, my clothes hanging loose on my frame. How long had it been since I'd eaten a proper meal? Days blurred together, marked only by new discoveries in the ever-changing file. I called Marcus Franklin from my car, parked outside the state capitol building where he now worked. "Detective Maddox," he said, voice smooth as polished marble. "I didn't expect to hear from you personally. Has there been a development?" "Senator Franklin, I'm looking into your mother's case again," I said. "I was wondering if you ever heard her mention any issues with the university's manuscript archives." A long silence followed, so long that I thought we'd been disconnected. "How did you know?" he finally asked, voice suddenly devoid of its political polish. "Know what?" "She was working on a paper about rare manuscripts in the university collection. Said she'd found discrepancies, items listed that weren't there, others that appeared without explanation." His voice dropped lower. "She mentioned it might involve academic fraud. We never told the police that. It didn't seem relevant at the time." I felt cold despite the summer heat blasting through my car windows. "Did your mother mention anyone specifically who might be involved?" "No," he said after a pause. "But she was nervous in the weeks before her death. Checking locks, looking over her shoulder, I thought she was being paranoid. Sleep became impossible. I'd doze off to the sound of papers rustling though the file was locked in my desk drawer. Sometimes I'd wake to whispers, indistinct murmurs that stopped the moment I opened my eyes. Once, I could have sworn I heard a woman's voice reciting what sounded like Latin phrases, the sound coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. My dreams, when they came, were filled with endless corridors of bookshelves, dark and close, pressing down on me. In one recurring nightmare, I was searching through ancient texts, the letters squirming on the page like insects. Behind me, footsteps would approach, measured and deliberate. I'd try to run, but my legs would turn to lead, and I'd jolt awake, gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. The case consumed me. I found myself driving to locations mentioned in the new notes without consciously deciding to go there. I'd interview witnesses again, checking alibis that suddenly didn't hold up. Former colleagues of Dr. Franklin remembered tension between her and Hargrove over research funding and manuscript access, something they'd never mentioned in their original statements. "We thought it was just academic politics," one professor told me, now nearing retirement himself. Looking back, though, he shuddered. There was something personal about his animosity toward Eleanor. "Did you ever tell the original detectives about this tension?" He looked confused. I don't think so. I don't think I remembered until you asked just now." I found myself driving to the university archives on a tip I couldn't remember receiving. The basement level was dimly lit, rows of climate-controlled storage units housing rare books and manuscripts. Standing among the shelves, I felt watched, the hairs on my neck standing up despite the warm, regulated air. The space was silent except for the soft hum of dehumidifiers. Perfect if you didn't know what lurked between the pages. I returned the next day with a warrant, having convinced my captain that we had credible evidence suggesting the murder was connected to academic fraud. He didn't ask where this evidence came from, perhaps seeing the desperate look in my eyes, the tremor in my hands. The archives gave up their secrets 2 days later, a catalog of missing manuscripts that dated back years before Dr. Franklin's murder. Valuable medieval texts that had been reported as temporarily unavailable for research, but were actually missing. A forgery scheme involving reproductions passed off as originals, while the real items were sold to private collectors. All overseen by James Hargrove, who had died of a stroke in 2010. The evidence trail was clear once we knew where to look. Bank records showing unexplained deposits, correspondence with shady collectors, forged provenance documents. Dr. Franklin had stumbled onto the scheme while researching for her book on medieval manuscripts. She'd confronted Hargrove, threatened to expose him. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt used. The captain congratulated me, clapping me on the back in the bullpen while other detectives looked on with a mixture of admiration and concern. "How did you know to look at the archives?" he asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What could I say? That a dead woman was feeding me information? That my case file had developed a life of its own? "Good police work," I finally muttered. "You should take some time off, Maddox," he said, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "You look like hell." That night I spread the entire file across my floor, trying to make sense of it all. The case was solved, the murder attributed to a dead man. Marcus Franklin had his closure, perfect timing for his re-election campaign. Yet the file continued to change. The lights flickered more violently than ever, and somewhere in my kitchen, glasses clinked together though no one was there. The temperature dropped until I could see my breath. From the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing in my hallway. Tall, angular, motionless. When I turned to look directly, nothing was there. "What do you want?" I shouted into the empty apartment. "It's over. We know who did it. Hargrove is dead." The only answer was a soft rustling of papers. When I looked down, the file had rearranged itself again. New crime scene photos showed marks on Dr. Franklin's desk that hadn't been documented before, distinctive scratches that matched a signet ring Hargrove always wore. But there was something else. Partial fingerprints on her glasses that belonged to someone else. My hands trembled as I picked up a statement from the university president, a man named Charles Whitmore, who had never appeared in the original file. According to this new statement, Whitmore and Hargrove had been close friends, sharing financial interests in several academic acquisitions over the years. "God, no," I whispered. There was an accomplice. The final photograph appeared sometime around midnight, sliding from between two reports I'd already checked a dozen times. It showed a man standing in what looked like my apartment, back to the camera, looking down at papers spread across the floor. The quality was grainy, like a security camera still. I was wearing the same clothes I had on at that very moment. On the back, in familiar handwriting, "Turn around. He's here." My hands shook as I set the photo down. The air in the room seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. Something cold brushed against the back of my neck. Not a touch, but the absence of one, as if the air itself had withdrawn. That's when I knew. The case wasn't solving itself. Something was using me to solve it. to finish what had started in that office with Eleanor Franklin, to expose secrets buried deeper than faded ink on ancient pages. I left my apartment that night with nothing but the clothes on my back and the case file under my arm. I called my sister from a gas station payphone, telling her I needed time away. I drove until dawn, checked into a motel under a false name, and spread the file out one last time. The new page was already there, waiting for me. "You can't leave me, detective. We're not finished yet. Charles Whitmore is still alive, still teaching, still stealing. I can show you where he keeps the manuscripts. My hands aren't my own as I write this account. My thoughts grow foggy. There are gaps in my memory now, hours that disappear like water down a drain. Sometimes I find myself in places I don't remember going, talking to people about ancient texts and academic integrity and the cost of knowledge. I see him sometimes, Charles Whitmore, through the eyes of his potential victims. Young scholars who don't notice him watching their research, cataloging their discoveries, planning how to claim them as his own. I feel Eleanor's outrage when I see him, her determination that he won't corrupt the pursuit of knowledge any further. Lately, I've been losing time more frequently. Yesterday, I came to myself standing outside his office, a wood-paneled sanctuary in the oldest building on campus, states away from where it all began. I had a letter opener in my pocket I don't remember buying. There was ink under my fingernails, though I don't recall writing anything. The file grows thicker every day. It has a life of its own, a purpose. Sometimes I think I catch glimpses of her in reflections, standing behind me, watching me work. Her cold hand guides mine as I write detailed exposés I never consciously conceived. Her voice whispers in my ear when I sleep, quoting passages from books that haven't seen daylight in centuries. I've tried to fight it, tried to burn the file once, the matches wouldn't light. Tried to throw it away, found it back on my motel bed when I returned. Tried to turn myself in to local police, found myself driving in the opposite direction with no memory of leaving the station. I know now why the file came to me. I wasn't chosen to solve this case. I was chosen to become part of it. Today, the handwriting in the file has changed. No longer mine, but precise academic penmanship in faded black ink. Tonight. We finish this tonight. I've made peace with what's happening to me, with what I'm becoming. Or maybe I no longer have the will to resist. The fury of a murdered professor is a powerful thing. A righteous fire that burns away doubt, fear, morality. If you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. But the file remains. It always remains, and it's not finished writing itself. They'll find Charles Whitmore soon. They'll find what's hidden in his office safe, his home library, his carefully catalogued private collection. They'll wonder who exposed him after all these years. They might even find traces of me. But they'll never find Eleanor. Not really. Because she's moved on to another file, another detective, another hunt. And as for me, I've given myself to the pages, to the cold spaces between words, to the shadows that dance in the corner of your eye when you're reading case files late at night, alone in your apartment, wondering if that sound you just heard was really just the building settling. Look up from these pages. Did something just move behind you? Story 4. The Vanishing Jury. Guilty. The word hung in the air of the Addison County courtroom like a physical thing, heavy and final. I watched as Judge Halsey nodded solemnly, the overhead lights casting deep shadows in the creases of his face. As jury foreman, I had been the one to utter that single, damning syllable on behalf of our 12. 7 women accused of witchcraft, and we had sealed their fate. The courtroom erupted, some spectators in tears, others in vindication. The 7 women stood together, hands bound, faces impassive. They didn't look like witches. But then again, what did a witch look like? They were ordinary women from Millfield, a midwife, a widow who lived alone with too many cats, a young girl with an unsettling laugh, sisters who kept to themselves, a woman who knew too much about herbs, and the librarian who'd been seen reading strange books after hours. Even now, months later, I can still feel Sarah Barrett's eyes on me from the defendant's stand. The librarian, the oldest of the accused. She didn't cry or plead like some of the others had during testimony. She simply watched us, her gaze moving from juror to juror, committing our faces to memory. "Justice has been served," Judge Halsey declared, banging his gavel with finality. "The sentence of exile is hereby delivered. These women are to be removed from Millfield, never to return on pain of death." Exile, not execution. It was 2019 after all, not 1692. Millfield prided itself on being progressive, even as it clung to antiquated laws from its colonial charter. The witchcraft statutes had never been formally repealed, and after 3 children had fallen mysteriously ill, whispers of unnatural forces had spread through town like wildfire. We filed out of the courtroom into the crisp September air, 12 ordinary citizens who had done our civic duty. There was Thomas Grierson, the mechanic, Rebecca Woolcott, the high school teacher, elderly Phil Jenkins, who kept nodding off during testimony, Darlene Hunt, who ran the local bakery, Kyle Preston, who'd argued most vehemently for conviction, twins Sarah and Samuel Dyer, Martin Chen, the pharmacist, Georgia Washington, who'd cried during closing arguments, Bryce Montgomery, the college student, and Evelyn Parker, who'd remained silent through most deliberations. And me, Daniel Crawford, architect and reluctant foreman. "Drinks at Callahan's," Thomas suggested, his voice artificially bright. "I think we've earned it." Some nodded, a collective desire to wash away the discomfort of what we'd just done. Others mumbled excuses and slipped away. I declined as well, wanting nothing more than to go home to my empty house and forget about Sarah Barrett's penetrating stare. "It's done," I told myself as I drove home. "We did what was right." But as I pulled into my driveway, a strange sensation prickled at the back of my neck, the distinct feeling of being watched. I turned but saw nothing except the swaying branches of oak trees, their leaves beginning to turn with the season. That night, it began to rain. I sat by my window, watching droplets trace patterns down the glass while nursing a whiskey. Something caught my eye, a figure standing across the street, motionless in the downpour. I blinked, and it was gone. Just my imagination, overwrought from 3 weeks of disturbing testimony. I should have known better. The first to disappear was Kyle Preston. 3 days after the verdict, his wife reported him missing. He'd gone for his morning run and never returned. Search parties combed the woods surrounding Millfield, but found nothing except his running shoe, perfectly placed in the middle of a small clearing, as if it had been deliberately set there. We heard about it on the local news. I remember feeling a vague unease, but nothing more. People went missing sometimes. It happened. Then came the first note. I found it tucked under my windshield wiper, a small piece of parchment, not modern paper, folded neatly in half. Inside, written in spidery handwriting, "One by one, the righteous fall. When darkness comes to claim them all, 12 who judged without true sight will vanish in the dead of night." I crumpled it up, telling myself it was a prank. Probably some teenager who thought it was funny to scare the witch trial jurors. But my hands were shaking as I threw it away. I called Rebecca that evening, wondering if she'd received anything similar. She had, the exact same message. So had Thomas and Georgia. We agreed to meet the next day at Callahan's to discuss it. Only Thomas never showed up. His truck was found parked at Miller's Crossing, the old covered bridge on the edge of town. The driver's door stood open, the keys still in the ignition. Inside the truck, arranged in a perfect circle on the passenger seat, were 12 black feathers. The police questioned us all. We showed them the notes, explained about the trial. They nodded sympathetically but reminded us that sending creepy notes wasn't a crime. They suggested the disappearances might be unrelated. People leave sometimes, they said. Adults have that right. Sheriff Bronson did assign a deputy to drive by our houses more frequently. It didn't help much with the nightmares, though. "Did you see the shadows?" Bryce asked, his voice trembling as we gathered in Rebecca's living room a week later. 10 of us remained. They're in my apartment, in the corners. They move when I'm not looking directly at them. Georgia nodded frantically. I hear whispering at night, women's voices. They stop when I turn on the light. "This is mass hysteria," Martin said firmly. "We're scaring ourselves because of those stupid notes." "Then how do you explain the disappearances?" Phil asked, his elderly voice cracking. "2 of us gone in a week." "People leave town all the time," Martin insisted. "Without their cars, without their wallets, without saying goodbye to their families," Rebecca challenged. I stayed quiet, not wanting to fuel the panic. I hadn't told them about what I'd seen in my bathroom mirror that morning. A brief glimpse of Sarah Barrett standing behind me, her reflection visible for just a second before vanishing when I spun around. "We should go to the judge," Samuel suggested. "Tell him what's happening." "And say what?" "That we're being haunted by the witches we convicted." Darlene scoffed. "He'll think we've lost our minds." "Maybe we have," Evelyn said softly. It was the first time I'd heard her speak since the trial ended. The discussion continued in circles until darkness fell, and one by one we returned to our homes, each of us jumping at shadows. That night, Phil Jenkins's son found him sitting in his recliner, staring vacantly at the television. He wouldn't respond to questions, wouldn't blink, wouldn't move. By the time paramedics arrived, Phil's body was there, but whatever had made him Phil was gone. The doctors called it catatonia. We knew better. The next morning, Sarah Dyer's car was found abandoned at the town limits. Her twin brother Samuel vanished from his locked bedroom that same night. 7 jurors remained, 7 like the witches we had condemned. "We have to find them," I said as we huddled in Martin's pharmacy after hours. "The witches. We need to talk to them." "They were exiled," Georgia reminded us. "No one knows where they went." "Someone must know," I insisted. Rebecca raised her hand tentatively. I think I might know someone who could help." She told us about a cousin who lived 2 towns over, a woman who practiced what she called the old ways. Not witchcraft, Rebecca hastily added, but something adjacent to it, a connection to forces most people ignored. "You want us to consult another witch?" Martin asked incredulously. "You have a better idea," Darlene snapped, fear making her voice sharp. We agreed to visit Rebecca's cousin the next day, all of us except Martin, who declared the whole thing ridiculous and dangerous. We found him the next morning inside his locked pharmacy. Not dead, not exactly, just empty. Sitting behind the counter, eyes open but unseeing, breathing but not present, and carved into the counter before him a single word: guilty. 6 jurors left. Rebecca's cousin Eliza lived in a normal-looking house with wind chimes hanging from the porch, and far too many plants crowding her windows. She listened to our story without interruption, her face growing more troubled with each detail. "This isn't just revenge," she finally said. "This is a binding, a gathering." "What does that mean?" I asked. It means the 7 women you convicted were not random targets. They were chosen carefully, each for something they possess: knowledge, sight, connection to what lies beyond. Together they form a circle, a complete entity. But they weren't working together, Bryce protested. They barely knew each other. Eliza shook her head sadly. That's where you're wrong. They may not have known each other in the ways you understand, but they were connected. And now they're using those connections, and yours to them through your judgment, to fulfill something much older than any of you. How do we stop it? Georgia whispered. You can't stop it, Eliza said simply, but you might survive it if you acknowledge the truth. What truth? Darlene demanded. That you convicted them not because they were guilty, but because you were afraid. We left Eliza's house unsettled and defensive. None of us wanted to admit she might be right. The drive back to Millfield was silent, each lost in our own thoughts. When we arrived at Rebecca's house to drop her off, the front door stood open. Inside, everything was undisturbed except for 12 black candles arranged in a circle in her living room. One was lit. The rest waited. 5 jurors remained. That night, my phone rang at exactly 3:17 a.m. It was Evelyn, her voice tight with panic. They're here, she whispered. In my house. I can hear them in the walls. They're saying my name. I'm calling the police, I told her. No police. They won't see what's happening. Just come over, please. All of you. I don't want to be alone. I called Bryce, Georgia, and Darlene. We agreed to meet at Evelyn's house. By the time I arrived, Bryce was already there. No sign of the others. Evelyn's front door was ajar, the house dark except for flickering candlelight from the living room. Evelyn? I called. Bryce? No answer. I stepped inside, heart pounding against my ribs. The living room walls were covered in writing, the same spidery script from the note I'd received. Names, dates, accusations. And in the center of the room, a circle of black candles. 5 were lit now. 7 remained dark. On the floor lay Bryce, conscious but frozen, his eyes wide with terror, lips moving soundlessly. Of Evelyn, there was no sign. I ran from the house, calling 911 with shaking hands. By the time the police arrived, Bryce was gone too. Just empty clothes on the floor, as if he'd evaporated within them. Georgia and Darlene never made it to Evelyn's. Georgia's car was found at the old cemetery, driver's door open, engine running. Darlene simply vanished from her bakery, leaving bread burning in the ovens and customers waiting at the counter. I was the only one left. The sheriff placed me under protective custody, though I could tell by the look in his eyes that he suspected me of involvement in my fellow jurors' disappearances. I didn't blame him. The alternative was too unbelievable. They put me in a cell with round-the-clock observation, no blind spots, multiple cameras, deputies checking every 15 minutes. It didn't matter. The shadows came anyway, stretching across my cell wall, 7 distinct silhouettes that shouldn't have been there given the lighting. I watched them lengthen, grow, until they surrounded me. In the corner of my cell appeared a black candle, though no one had brought it in. It lit itself as I watched, the flame burning impossibly blue. "What do you want?" I whispered to the darkness. The whispers came then, 7 voices speaking as one. Truth. The word echoed in my head, in my bones. I told the truth. I protested weakly. You were practicing witchcraft. The evidence, not our truth, yours. The shadows on the wall began to move, to change shape. I saw scenes from the trial playing out like a distorted film. Witnesses lying, evidence planted, the judge conferring privately with town officials who had wanted the women gone for reasons that had nothing to do with witchcraft and everything to do with the valuable land they owned collectively. I saw Kyle pressuring the other jurors, making insinuations about what would happen to anyone who voted for acquittal. I saw myself staying silent when I should have spoken up. We were wrong, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. I was wrong. Confess, the voices demanded. And so I did. To the empty cell, to the cameras recording my apparent breakdown, I confessed everything. How the trial had been orchestrated from the beginning. How we'd ignored evidence that contradicted the prosecution's narrative. How we'd been complicit in a modern-day witch hunt motivated by greed, disguised as moral panic. As I spoke, the shadows grew more solid, more real. I could make out their features now, the 7 women we had convicted, standing in a circle around me. Sarah Barrett stepped forward, her form more substantial than the others. "The guilty are judged as they have judged others," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "But confession brings mercy." "Are you going to kill me?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "We're going to show you." The candle's flame leapt higher, and the cell dissolved around me. I found myself standing in a forest clearing under a full moon. Before me were the 11 other jurors, standing in a circle, their expressions vacant. In the center of the circle stood the 7 women, no longer accused, but accusers. "Your verdict has been returned," Sarah announced. "You 12 are found guilty of false judgment, of allowing fear and prejudice to overwhelm truth and justice." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small in the vastness of the night. "Now you understand power," she replied. "Real power, not the kind men like Judge Halsey pretend to wield." The 7 women joined hands, and energy crackled between them, visible, tangible power that made the air shimmer. "We are the Millfield 7, Sarah continued. 7 bloodlines, 7 powers, guardians of this land since long before your ancestors claimed it. We watched over it, kept balance, until you cast us out." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Sorry isn't enough," she said, "but it's a beginning." She extended her hand to me. "Choose, Daniel Crawford. Join your fellow jurors in penance or join us in purpose." I looked at my fellow jurors, empty vessels now, shadows of who they had been. Then I looked at the 7 women, vibrant with an energy I could almost taste. I took Sarah's hand. The final juror's cell was found empty at dawn, though the door remained locked and the cameras showed no one entering or leaving. Just static at precisely 3:17 a.m., and when the picture cleared, Daniel Crawford was gone. The case of the vanishing jury became local legend in Millfield. Some said they were victims of an elaborate revenge plot. Others whispered that the witches had returned and taken them. The most rational explanation offered was mass hysteria, followed by a spree of unconnected disappearances and mental breaks. The 7 accused women were never seen again. The exile order was formally rescinded a year later, but none returned to claim their property. Sometimes, though, on nights when the moon is full, hikers in the woods surrounding Millfield report seeing lights in a clearing, 13 candles in a circle, and shadowy figures moving around them, 12 that follow and 7 that lead. And in the town, strange occurrences are met with knowing looks and whispered warnings. Be careful who you judge, lest you be judged in return. The Millfield witch trial has been struck from official records, the transcripts mysteriously lost in a courthouse fire. No photograph of the 12 jurors exists anymore, as if they've been erased from history. But sometimes, when the veil between worlds grows thin, locals claim to see 13 black birds circling above the town, watching, waiting, remembering. Justice, after all, takes many forms, and judgment, once passed, can always be returned. Story 5. The cult that summoned something real. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. Even as a child, I dismissed ghost stories as mere fiction, designed to frighten and entertain. Science was my religion. Logic, my shield. But that was before I returned to Ravenwood, before I learned what my ancestors had done, before I felt the weight of their sins pressing down on my shoulders like invisible hands, before it started following me. It began with my grandmother's death. She passed in her sleep, they said, natural causes, a peaceful end to a long life. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since I left Ravenwood at 18, desperate to escape the claustrophobic confines of small-town life. When the lawyer called to inform me I'd inherited her house, a Victorian monstrosity at the edge of town, I almost declined. But something pulled me back. Curiosity, perhaps, or something less innocent. The house smelled of dust and lavender when I arrived, exactly as I remembered. Sheets draped over furniture like shrouds, windows filmed with grime, filtering the sunlight into a sickly yellow glow. I walked through rooms frozen in time, my footsteps echoing on hardwood floors. In the foyer hung a portrait of my grandfather, stern-faced and severe in his Sunday best. I never met him. He died before I was born, but those eyes seemed to follow me, accusatory. That first night, I dreamt of a circle of people in the woods, their faces obscured by shadow. They stood around a crude altar of stacked stones, chanting words I couldn't understand, and watching from the trees, something darker than the darkness itself. I woke drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around my legs like bindings. Just stress, I told myself, just the unfamiliar surroundings. The next morning brought news that disturbed the quiet routine of Ravenwood. Martin Holloway, owner of the local hardware store, had been found dead in his garage. Apparent suicide, though the details were murky. I barely remembered him, but his name triggered something, a childhood memory of my grandmother whispering to my mother, "The Holloways were always marked. It was only a matter of time." I might have dismissed it as the ramblings of a superstitious old woman, except for what happened next. 3 days after Martin Holloway's funeral, his daughter vanished. Rebecca Holloway, 26, last seen walking home from her shift at the diner. Her car was found abandoned on Creek Road, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, just gone, as if the night had swallowed her whole. I joined the search party out of a sense of civic duty, though I knew none of these people anymore. We combed the woods surrounding Creek Road, calling Rebecca's name into the endless trees. The forest felt wrong somehow, too quiet, too still, as if something had scared away all natural life. As darkness fell, Sheriff Daniels called off the search until morning. I lingered, watching the beam of my flashlight dance across the underbrush. That's when I saw it for the first time, just beyond the reach of my light, a shadow that didn't belong to any tree or bush, a shadow that seemed to stand upright, vaguely human in shape but wrong in proportion. Too tall, too thin, and though I couldn't see its face, if it had one, I felt it watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. Imagination, I told myself, the power of suggestion in these haunted woods. But walking back to my car, I noticed something carved into a massive oak tree, a symbol I'd never seen before, a circle containing a pattern of intersecting lines like a web or a map. I traced it with my fingers, feeling the grooves cut deep into the bark. Fresh cuts. New. That night I found the same symbol drawn in condensation on my bathroom mirror. The Ravenwood Historical Society occupied a small brick building on Main Street. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Pembroke, peered at me over her reading glasses when I inquired about town history, specifically any unusual groups or organizations from the 1970s. "Why the interest, dear?" she asked, her voice sweet, but her eyes sharp. I lied, said I was writing a book about small-town Americana. She seemed to accept this, disappearing into the archives, and returning with a stack of leather-bound books and manila folders. "Not much documented about that sort of thing," she said. "Ravenwood has always been a God-fearing community." The way she emphasized documented gave me pause. Hours of research yielded little until I found a small article in a 1973 issue of the Ravenwood Gazette. A brief mention of disturbing ritualistic markings found in Blackwood Forest following the disappearance of teenager Eliza Carter. The case was never solved, the article noted, but suspicious gatherings in the forest ceased after harsh words from the town pastor. As I was leaving, Mrs. Pembroke handed me a thin book with no author listed on its spine. "You might find this interesting," she said, her voice lower now. "Local legends and folklore, not all of it suitable for wider publication." I thanked her, but as I reached for the book, her bony fingers gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Your grandmother," she said. "She was a good woman. In the end." Before I could ask what she meant, the phone rang, and she hurried back to her desk, leaving me with an uneasy feeling and a book of horrors I wasn't yet ready to face. 3 more disappearances over the next week, all descendants of families who had lived in Ravenwood for generations. The town buzzed with frightened whispers. Some blamed a serial killer. Others, more practical, suggested people were leaving town without telling anyone, spooked by whatever had happened to the Holloways. But I knew better now. The book Mrs. Pembroke had given me contained local legends dating back to the town's founding in 1847. Most were standard fare: ghostly hitchhikers, vengeful spirits, buried treasure. But the final chapter described something different, an entity the original settlers had encountered in the woods, something they called the Watcher in the Dark. According to legend, it could only be seen peripherally, vanishing when confronted directly. It followed its victims for days or weeks before they disappeared, never to be seen again. The description matched what I'd seen in the woods. The chapter ended abruptly, as if pages had been removed. The next morning I returned to the Historical Society, but found the building locked, a handwritten sign on the door: "Closed until further notice." When I called Mrs. Pembroke's home, no one answered. That afternoon, I discovered my grandmother's journals hidden in a compartment beneath her bedroom floorboards. Dozens of them, dating back to 1972. I stayed up all night reading, my horror growing with each page. The truth was worse than I could have imagined. In 1972, 7 families in Ravenwood, including my grandparents, formed what they called the Circle. Not quite a cult, at least not initially. More a reaction against the conservative values of the town. They met in secret, experimenting with what my grandmother described as alternative spirituality. They found a book of rituals in the university library 2 towns over. Ancient rites translated from texts that predated Christianity. Most were harmless: fertility blessings, healing ceremonies. But there was one ritual they found particularly intriguing: the summoning of that which waits. It promised to open a door to another realm and call forth an entity that would grant knowledge and power. The ritual required 7 participants, 7 sacrifices, animals, not humans, and had to be performed during the autumn equinox over 7 consecutive years. None of us truly believed it would work, my grandmother wrote. It was a game, a rebellion. The sacrifices were symbolic, small amounts of blood from the animals, which were then released unharmed. We laughed as we chanted the words, mocking their solemnity. We were young and stupid and arrogant. But by the 7th year, things had changed. 2 members of the circle reported strange shadows following them. Objects moved in their houses. Whispers came from empty rooms. They wanted to stop, but the others, including my grandfather, the leader, insisted they complete what they'd started. On September 22nd, 1978, they performed the final ritual. My grandmother's account of that night was fragmented, hysterical. She described a darkness that moved against the darkness, a cold that froze breath in lungs, a presence that seemed to consume light itself. And when it was over, they all felt it. Something had answered their call. Something had crossed over. The circle disbanded immediately. Some members left town. Others, like my grandparents, stayed but never spoke of what they'd done. They buried the ritual items, burned the books, and pretended nothing had happened. But my grandmother knew better. The entity they had summoned was real, and it was patient. In her final journal entry, dated just 3 days before her death, she wrote, "It's coming for us now, after all these years, one by one. I can feel it watching me. God forgive us for what we've done." I spent days tracking down the remaining members of the circle and their descendants. Many had died under mysterious circumstances over the years. Accidents, suicides, sudden illnesses. Too many to be coincidence. One name kept appearing in my grandmother's later journals. Daniel Thorne, the only other original member still alive. According to her, he'd become a recluse, living in a cabin deep in Blackwood Forest. She'd visited him occasionally, sharing their growing fear that something was hunting them. Finding Thorne's cabin took hours of searching. When I finally arrived, the door stood open, swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the walls were covered with the same symbol I'd seen in the woods, the circle with intersecting lines, drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Sitting at a table in the center of the room was an old man, his eyes fixed on nothing, his skin gray and waxen. Daniel Thorne had been dead for days, but he'd left something for me, a leather-bound book and a note addressed to the last descendant. "You've come looking for answers," the note read. "I've been expecting someone. The entity we summoned exists between worlds. It feeds on fear and death and uses our bloodlines as anchors to this reality. Every descendant it takes makes it stronger, more present. There's only one way to send it back. The same 7 families must unite again, reverse the ritual, and close the door we opened. But we're almost all gone now. It may be too late. If you're reading this, I'm already taken. You're next. Unless ... The rest of the note was missing, torn away. The book, however, contained the complete ritual, both the summoning and, crucially, the banishment. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in Thorne's window. Behind me stood a figure so tall its head bent against the ceiling, its limbs impossibly thin and long, its face a void darker than darkness itself. I whirled around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. When I looked back at the window, my reflection was alone. But I knew the truth now. It wasn't just behind me in the reflection, it was behind me everywhere I went. Finding the descendants of the original 7 families proved nearly impossible. Most had died or disappeared. I managed to locate 3: Sarah Lockwood, Michael Hayes, and Judith Pierce. None knew about their parents' involvement in the circle. All reported being followed by shadows, seeing strange reflections, finding that symbol appearing in their homes. We agreed to meet at my grandmother's house to discuss what I'd discovered. Only Sarah showed up. Michael's wife called to say he'd been in a car accident on the way. Drove off Widow's Bridge at full speed. No skid marks, no explanation. Judith simply never answered her phone again. Sarah and I spent the night poring over the ritual book, trying to understand if 2 people could accomplish what was meant for 7. The answer seemed to be no. The banishment required the blood of all 7 original families, freely given at the site of the first summoning. "We need to find the others," Sarah insisted. "There must be cousins, distant relatives." But as she spoke, I noticed something moving behind her, a shadow detaching itself from the wall, growing taller, forming into that now familiar silhouette. I tried to warn her, but no sound came out. The shadow loomed over her, and then, impossibly, reached into her. Sarah gasped, her eyes widening as her body went rigid. When she exhaled, her breath emerged as black mist that the shadow eagerly absorbed. She collapsed, still breathing but unconscious. As I rushed to her side, my phone rang. The hospital. Sarah's twin sister had just been admitted after an unexplained seizure. I understood then. The entity wasn't just taking us, it was consuming our very essence, using us to strengthen its hold on this world. And it was getting stronger. I drove Sarah to the hospital where doctors could find nothing physically wrong with her. She remained in a coma-like state, unresponsive to stimuli. Her twin exhibited the same symptoms, though they'd been miles apart when it happened. Returning to my grandmother's house, I found the ritual book open to a page I hadn't noticed before, a hidden compartment in the binding revealing additional text. The truth was more horrific than I'd imagined. The entity we'd summoned wasn't some ancient demon or spirit. It was something older, something that existed before humanity conceived of good and evil. The original text called it the void between stars. It didn't want worship or sacrifices. It wanted to exist fully in our world, and to do so, it needed to consume the bloodlines that had called it, completely. The banishment ritual couldn't just send it back. It required a new anchor, a voluntary sacrifice to take the entity's place in the void between worlds. Someone would have to trade places with it. As I read these words, the lights in the house flickered. In the momentary darkness, I felt cold breath on the back of my neck. When light returned, every mirror and window in the room showed the same reflection. Me, and behind me, the entity, now so close I could feel its emptiness pulling at my soul. I ran. The next 3 days passed in a blur of motion. I didn't dare stay in one place too long. I researched obsessively, calling occult experts, professors of folklore, anyone who might help. Most thought I was crazy. One elderly professor from Miskatonic University warned me gravely not to pursue this further. Some doors once opened could never truly be closed again. But I had no choice. The entity was consuming the remaining descendants rapidly now. The hospital reported 5 coma patients with identical symptoms, all related to original Circle members. News reports described a mysterious illness spreading through Ravenwood. The CDC was being called in. They wouldn't find anything with microscopes and blood tests. The disease was much older than science. In my desperate research, I discovered something crucial. The entity couldn't fully manifest without consuming all 7 bloodlines. It needed us complete. If even one line survived, it would eventually weaken and retreat to its own realm. I am the last of my line, the last descendant of Richard and Eleanor Walker, founding members of the Circle. If I die, or worse, if the entity takes me, there will be no one left to resist it. Last night, I returned to Blackwood Forest, to the clearing where it all began. The stone altar still stood, moss-covered and ancient-looking, though it had been built by human hands in 1972. The circle with intersecting lines was carved deeply into its surface. A map, I finally realized. A map of the stars as they appeared during that fateful autumn equinox, showing the precise moment when the boundaries between worlds grew thin. I brought the ritual book and my grandmother's journals. As I prepared the site according to the banishment instructions, I felt the forest go silent around me. No insects chirping, no leaves rustling, just complete, unnatural stillness. And then I sensed it behind me, the entity closer than ever before. When I turned, I saw it clearly for the first time. Not just a shadow or a reflection, but fully present. A darkness with form and substance. Vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every detail. Limbs too numerous and joints bending in impossible directions. Where its face should be, only a void that seemed to pull at my vision, as if trying to draw my very sight into its emptiness. It knew what I intended. It approached slowly, confidently, knowing I had nowhere to run. That's when I made my decision. The only decision left. I'm writing this account in the final hours before dawn. By the time anyone reads these words, it will be done. I've prepared the ritual site. At sunrise, I'll complete the banishment. The entity remains outside the circle I've drawn, watching, waiting. It thinks I plan to escape somehow, to find a loophole in the ritual, a way to close the door without paying the price. It doesn't understand human sacrifice. It doesn't understand that sometimes there are things worse than death or imprisonment in the void, like knowing you're responsible for unleashing an ancient horror into the world. I am the last of the Walker line, the last descendant of the circle. When I complete this ritual, the entity will need a new anchor to the void, and I will provide one. Myself, a voluntary sacrifice. Will it be oblivion, or conscious torment in the space between worlds? I don't know. My grandmother's journals suggest the latter, which terrifies me more than I can express. But I see no other choice. The entity grows impatient. It circles my protective barriers, testing for weaknesses. Dawn approaches. If you're reading this, know that what happened in Ravenwood was real. The cult that formed here didn't just play at summoning something, they succeeded, and their descendants paid the price. I hear whispers now, promises of knowledge and power if I step outside the circle, threats of endless torment if I complete the ritual. The entity's desperation is palpable. It knows what's coming. The first ray of sunlight breaks through the trees. It's time. I am Eleanor Walker's granddaughter, and I will end what she began. The journal ends here. The following was added by another hand, presumably a police investigator or journalist. The body of Dr. Catherine Walker was discovered in Blackwood Forest on October 17, 2024, within a circle of unusual markings. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as cardiac arrest, though no pre-existing heart condition was noted in her medical records. Oddly, security cameras in Ravenwood Memorial Hospital recorded all 6 coma patients waking simultaneously at the precise moment of Dr. Walker's death, according to timestamps. Story 6. The Silent House on Oak Street. I'm writing this down while I still can, while my voice still works, while my thoughts are still my own. The pen trembles between my fingers as I write, and the silence in my apartment feels heavy, expectant, as if something is waiting for me to finish. It started 3 months ago when I stumbled across an obscure thread on a true crime forum at 2:37 a.m. during one of those sleepless nights when I fall down research rabbit holes. Someone mentioned the Baines family murders in passing, just a footnote in a discussion about unsolved cases from the summer of 1972. 4 people dead in a single night, found seated around their dining room table with untouched dinner plates before them. No signs of forced entry, no weapon ever found, no evidence of poison in their systems. Barely a paragraph in the local papers before it was forgotten, overshadowed by a factory explosion the following day that claimed 12 lives and dominated the news cycle for weeks afterward. I've always been drawn to the stories others overlook. My podcast, Whispered Histories, focuses on exactly these kinds of cases, the ones that slip through the cracks of public memory. I've built a modest following of 20,000 listeners who share my fascination with the forgotten corners of human experience. My voice, once described by a reviewer as honey poured over gravel, has become my livelihood, and something about the Baines case hooked into me from the beginning, snagged on some hidden part of my psyche, and wouldn't let go. Maybe it was how cleanly it had been erased from history, or the strange circumstances noted in the only surviving police statement I found buried in county archives. All victims found with expressions of peace, no signs of struggle, mouths open in identical positions, vocal cords showing unusual deterioration inconsistent with post-mortem changes, cause of death undetermined. The medical examiner's signature on the document was shaky, almost illegible, as if his hand had trembled violently while writing. The address was easy enough to find, 1421 Oak Street, a modest two-story Victorian on a quiet street lined with maple trees, just 2 towns over from where I live. The property records showed the house had changed hands 12 times in the 50 years since the murders. No owner had stayed longer than 8 months. Most of the transitions were hurried sales at well below market value, and I found 3 cases where the owners simply disappeared, leaving the property to be claimed by the bank after tax defaults. The paperwork for each transaction was sparse, lacking the standard disclosures required by law. I drove by it first, just to see. It was mid-October, and a light drizzle misted the air, refracting the weak sunlight into ghostly halos around the street lamps. The house was unassuming. Faded yellow paint peeling at the corners, sagging porch with missing balusters. Overgrown yard where browning ivy had claimed an ancient bird bath. A for sale sign tilted in the front yard, the realtor's name faded by sun and rain to near illegibility. Only the phone number remained clear, as if recently refreshed. The windows reflected the gray sky like dull eyes. There was nothing overtly menacing about it, nothing to suggest what had happened inside those walls. But even from my car, I felt a strange pressure in my ears, like the sudden change in altitude when driving up a mountain. My car radio, which had been playing a soft classical piece, dissolved into static as I passed the property, and the temperature inside the car dropped several degrees. My breath fogged the window glass. I decided to park and walk by on foot. That's when I noticed how quiet the street was. No birds, no distant traffic sounds, no children playing, despite it being a Saturday afternoon in summer. Just a cottony stillness that seemed to thicken the closer I got to 1421. I took a few photos with my phone and left. That night, reviewing the images, I noticed something peculiar. In each photo, the house appeared slightly different. The angle of the porch roof, the number of front windows, the pattern of the decorative trim. I assumed it was just the changing perspective as I'd walked by. My research over the next few weeks uncovered almost nothing about the Baines family. It was as if they'd been systematically removed from public record. Thomas Baines had worked at the local paper mill. His wife Margaret had been a substitute teacher. They had twin daughters, Evelyn and Caroline, both 17 when they died. No extended family ever came forward. No friends spoke to the press. The investigating officers had both died within a year of the case, one from a sudden stroke, the other in a single vehicle accident. I found one elderly librarian who remembered the incident. Marion Wolcott, 86 years old, with thin white hair and hands spotted with age. She'd been working at the Clayton County Library when it happened. When I mentioned the address, her face changed, grew slack. The teacup she was lifting to her lips paused mid-air, trembling slightly. "People who ask about that house," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that scraped like sandpaper. "They stop asking eventually." She wouldn't elaborate, but her eyes kept darting to the windows of the small cafe where we met, as if expecting to see someone, or something, watching us. As I was leaving, she gripped my wrist with surprising strength, her papery skin cool against mine. her fingernails digging half-moons into my flesh. "They couldn't scream," she said, her pupils dilating until her eyes seemed nearly black. That's what everyone forgot to mention. When they found the bodies, the medical examiner tried to close their mouths, but the jaws wouldn't move. Rigor mortis, they said, but it was too soon for that. And their throats were not right, like something had reached down and... She made a twisting gesture with her free hand, then released me abruptly and turned away. I called her 3 days later with follow-up questions. Her daughter informed me that Marion had suffered a stroke the evening after our meeting and could no longer speak. The doctors were baffled by the sudden onset and the specific damage to her vocal cords. I recorded everything for my podcast, of course. Listening to the playback that evening, I noticed a strange background noise I hadn't heard during the recording. A steady, rhythmic whisper, like someone slowly exhaling over and over. I ran it through audio software, but couldn't isolate or identify the sound. That night, I dreamed of standing on Oak Street watching the house breathe. Its walls expanded and contracted like lungs. I woke up with a sore throat. 2 weeks in, I located a former mail carrier who'd worked the Oak Street route in the 1980s. He agreed to meet me at a diner outside of town. He was nervous, kept looking over his shoulder. "That house doesn't like attention," he told me, stirring his coffee endlessly. I delivered mail there for 22 years, saw 6 different families move in and out. They all changed the same way. When I asked how, he leaned forward. "First, they get quiet, stop talking to neighbors. Then they start spending time in the basement, day and night. Then they stop coming out altogether." "Did anyone ever check on them?" I asked. "Police went in twice that I know of. Found nothing. Empty house each time. No people, no belongings. Just empty rooms and this smell, like wet soil and something burning." My throat was getting worse. I'd developed a persistent cough that no syrup seemed to touch. My doctor found nothing wrong, suggested it might be stress or seasonal allergies. But I knew it had started the day I first saw the house. I decided I needed to see inside. The real estate company managing the property was happy to schedule a showing. The house had been vacant for 11 months, and they seemed eager to find a buyer. The agent who met me there was distracted, kept checking her watch. She barely spoke as she unlocked the door. The interior was unremarkable at first glance. Hardwood floors worn in the centers of each room from decades of footsteps. Faded floral wallpaper curling at the seams, revealing layers beneath. 6 different patterns visible in some spots, like geological strata. Empty rooms echoing with our footsteps. Dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light that managed to penetrate the grime-coated windows. A crystal chandelier hung in the dining room, each prism clouded with age, but somehow still catching and fracturing the light in unsettling patterns that skittered across the walls like living things. But the silence inside was different, dense, watchful, pressing against my eardrums. Each sound we made seemed to be absorbed rather than echoed, as if the house were hungry for noise. I clapped once in the center of the living room, a test I often use to gauge acoustics for podcast recordings, and the sound fell flat, dead, as if it had traveled nowhere. The temperature inside was noticeably cooler than outside, though no air conditioning hummed. A strange, sweet scent lingered at the edges of perception, like overripe fruit mixed with wet soil. The agent, a thin woman with artificially bright blonde hair and a name tag reading Beverly, stayed by the front door while I explored, her high heels rooted to the entry mat, as if reluctant to venture deeper. She kept one hand at her throat, massaging it unconsciously. Twice I caught her mouthing words to herself, rehearsing something, her lips moving silently. The basement door was locked. When I asked about it, she shook her head. "Foundation issues," she said shortly. Not safe to go down there without proper equipment. I noticed her voice had grown hoarse in the few minutes we'd been inside. She cleared her throat repeatedly as she locked up and declined my request for a second viewing. That night, I lost my voice entirely. Complete laryngitis, according to the urgent care doctor. Just one of those things. It would return in a few days. Nothing to worry about. But I knew better. The house had noticed me. In the silence of my voicelessness, I began to hear things, whispers at the edge of sleep, the sound of footsteps in empty rooms, breathing behind closed doors. My dreams became more vivid. Each night I found myself back at 1421 Oak Street, walking from room to room. In each dream, I descended one more step into the basement. I stopped recording my podcast. How could I, without a voice? My followers sent concerned messages that I couldn't bring myself to answer. I stopped going to work, stopped seeing friends. The silence was becoming comfortable, a blanket I wrapped around myself. I began driving to Oak Street daily, parking across from 1421, watching for hours. Sometimes I thought I saw faces in the upper windows, young girls' faces pressed against the glass. Sometimes I thought I heard singing, a soft lullaby that made my damaged throat ache with the urge to join in. 3 days ago, I found a key in my jacket pocket. I don't remember how it got there. The brass was tarnished, the teeth intricate and old-fashioned. I knew immediately what lock it would open. I went to the house that night. No one saw me slip across the overgrown lawn, up the creaking porch steps. The key fit perfectly in the front door. Inside, the house was different than during my viewing. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint red light, like the glow of embers. The air was thick, warm, copper-scented. The basement door stood open. I descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath my weight, with a sound like small animal bones breaking. The wooden handrail felt warm under my palm, almost feverish, and seemed to pulse slightly with an irregular rhythm. 13 steps down, I counted reflexively, an old superstition from childhood, and the darkness at the bottom wasn't complete. A faint, pulsing burgundy glow emanated from somewhere deeper in the space. The basement stretched far larger than the house above could possibly contain. A cavernous space with packed dirt floors and rough stone walls that glistened with moisture. The ceiling hung low in places, then soared in others, defying architectural logic. Water trickled down one wall, but upon closer inspection it was too viscous, too dark to be water. It collected in a small depression in the dirt floor, forming a puddle that reflected nothing. The air was thick with that overripe sweetness I'd noticed upstairs, but stronger now, with metallic undertones that coated my tongue and made my gums ache. The temperature fluctuated as I moved deeper, patches of cold that raised goosebumps on my arms, followed by areas of stifling heat that made sweat bead instantly on my forehead. At the center of this impossible space stood 4 wooden chairs arranged in a perfect circle. They were mismatched. A heavy oak dining chair, an elegant Queen Anne with cabriole legs, a simple ladder back, and what appeared to be a child's school chair. All were worn smooth with age and use, the wood polished to a dull gleam by countless hands. In each chair sat a figure, a man, a woman, 2 teenage girls. The Baines family facing each other in silence. Their bodies were desiccated but intact, preserved like ancient mummies, skin stretched tight over bone frames, leathery and amber-colored. Their clothes, a 1970s business suit for him, a floral dress for her, matching miniskirts and blouses for the girls, were faded but uncorrupted by time or decay. Their hair remained intact, styled as it must have been on that final evening. They sat with perfect posture, hands resting in their laps, and their faces, God, their faces, eyes open but clouded, milky white and yet somehow still aware, tracking my movement as I circled them. Their mouths were open in identical expressions, not screams as I first thought, but something more complex. Yearning, ecstasy, transcendence. Their jaws stretched wider than seemed humanly possible, hinged like snakes preparing to swallow something whole. Between them on the dirt floor was a dark stain in the shape of a perfect circle, precisely inscribed as if drawn with a compass. The earth within this boundary was different, blacker, more fertile looking, almost moving with a subtle rhythm like the surface of a liquid disturbed by sound waves. As I watched, the stain pulsed in time with the reddish light that seemed to have no source. I should have run, should have called the police. Instead, I found myself walking forward, drawn by a terrible curiosity. As I approached, I heard it, a sound like many voices whispering together, rising from that stained circle of earth. The whispers resolved into words, into stories, the secrets of the Baines family, the terrible thing they had invited into their home, the ritual they had performed in desperate hope of containing it. I understand now. The house doesn't kill. It collects. It preserves. It keeps safe the voices and minds of those who would expose its secrets. I'm writing this down while I still can. My voice is gone completely now. My thoughts grow clouded with each passing hour. I find myself drawn back to Oak Street, to that basement, to that circle. I want to take my place with the others. I want to join the chorus of whispers. Part of me is already there, has always been there, waiting for the rest to arrive. If you're reading this, you're already involved. You know about the house now. It knows about you. It has always known about you. Perhaps it chose you to find these words, just as it chose me to write them. My handwriting is deteriorating as I reach the end of this account. My fingers are growing numb. The silence in my apartment deepens with each passing minute. The walls seem to breathe. The corners of the room extend beyond what is physically possible. I haven't heard a sound from outside in days. No traffic, no birds, no neighbors. Just the soft, rhythmic whispers that emerge from the heating vents, the water pipes, the electrical outlets. Always whispering, always inviting. Listen carefully in the silence of your room tonight. Do you hear it, that soft exhalation? The gentle whisper of my voice calling you to Oak Street. Can you feel the subtle change in air pressure against your eardrums? The slight metallic taste developing at the back of your throat? I have to go now. There's a chair waiting for me, the fifth chair that has always been there, though I didn't see it at first. It's made of darker wood than the others, almost black, ornately carved with patterns that shift when viewed from different angles. The seat is worn in exactly the shape of my body. My name is carved into the back slat, though I don't remember seeing that before. The letters look old, weathered, as if they've been there for decades. Don't come looking for me. Don't investigate further. Don't speak my name aloud in the dark. Some stories aren't meant to be told. Some houses keep their secrets, and some silence can never be broken. But if you listen closely enough, in the moments between heartbeats, in the pause between inhale and exhale, you might hear us trying. Our mouths are open, our throats are ready. The circle is almost complete. All we need is one more voice, yours. Story 7, The Bloodstained Diary. They tell you in the academy that detectives are made not born, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes detectives are neither made nor born. Sometimes they're chosen, marked, destined. I know this now, though understanding came too late. My name is Detective Alexandra Reeves, 15 years with Millhaven PD. Before the diary, I was known for my photographic memory and meticulous case files. They called me the machine behind my back. Not because I lacked emotion, but because I never missed a detail, never lost a thread. The wall of my cramped office showcased my commendations, each frame a testament to crime solved through nothing but patience and precision. Now those same frames reflect my face as I write this confession, the glass showing a woman I barely recognize. Dark circles rim my eyes, and my once steady hands tremble against the paper. The first body appeared on October 14th in Millhaven, a town so small we hadn't seen a homicide in 6 years. The morning air was sharp with autumn cold when the call came through. Dispatcher's voice cracked as she gave the address. 103 Cedar Street, the Victorian with the hydrangea bushes and the red door. Marjorie Phillips, 47, lay sprawled across her black and white checkered kitchen tiles, one slipper still on her left foot, the right one overturned 3 feet away. Her throat had been cut with such precision it resembled a second mouth, bloodless and gaping. Where her eyes should have been were 2 perfectly hollowed sockets, the skin around them unmarred, as if her eyes had simply dissolved. The scene was methodical, no sign of forced entry, minimal blood spatter despite the severity of the wounds, and a single black feather, raven, I would later confirm, placed delicately between her bluish lips. Her collection of ornate bird cages stood silent in the adjoining sunroom, the exotic finches and canaries all missing. I remember thinking it looked staged, like someone's idea of what a ritual killing should be. The copper smell of blood mixed with the lingering aroma of the cinnamon rolls she'd apparently been baking when she died. One tray sat cooling on the counter, perfectly formed spirals now cold and hard. The oven timer had long since stopped its beeping. 2 weeks later, Thomas Garvey, 39, was discovered in his garage by his teenage son returning from football practice. Thomas was slumped over his prized 1967 Mustang, restoration tools still clutched in his rigged hand. Same M.O., throat cut with surgical precision, eyes gone without any tissue damage around the sockets. Black feather. This time, there was a crude symbol carved into his forehead, what looked like an inverted triangle with a line through it. The symbol had been cut post-mortem, according to the medical examiner, Dr. Eleanor Patel, whose hands shook slightly as she made the Y incision during the autopsy I insisted on witnessing. 22 years in this job, she whispered to me over Thomas's exposed chest cavity, and I've never seen eyes removed with this level of precision. It's like they were never there to begin with. Forensics found motor oil under Marjorie's fingernails. Thomas had serviced her car the week before. A connection, but a tenuous one in a town where everyone used the same mechanic. The third victim came 3 days after that. Gerald Watts, 61, former high school principal, found in his study with a chess game half finished in front of him. Playing against himself, his wife said. He always played black and white, keeping his mind sharp in retirement. The white pieces were still in perfect position. The black ones were scattered across the oriental rug, some crushed to powder under what must have been the killer's boots. Same injuries, same feather, same lack of evidence. By then, we knew we had a serial killer, and the state police were mobilizing resources. Their mobile command unit, a sleek, tech-filled RV that looked obscenely out of place next to our modest station, hummed in our parking lot. But Millhaven is my town. These were my people. I'd watched Thomas Garvey grow up, had been in Principal Watts's office more than once as a rebellious teenager. And despite the state police lieutenant's condescending tone when he suggested I let the big boys handle this one, this was my case. It was after the 4th victim that Chief Nowak called me into his office. His face was gray, his eyes troubled. "We found something at the old Everett place," he said, sliding a plastic evidence bag across his desk. "Fire crew was clearing debris from last year's blaze and found this in what was left of the attic. Thought you should see it." Inside was a leather-bound journal, charred around the edges but largely intact. The cover was a deep burgundy color that didn't look quite like any leather I'd seen before. Too lustrous, almost wet-looking despite being dry to the touch. Embossed on the front was an unfamiliar symbol that resembled the one carved into Thomas Garvey's forehead. When I picked it up, the binding felt warm to the touch, as if the fire that had supposedly destroyed it was still smoldering somewhere inside. A faint, coppery scent wafted from its pages like old pennies or blood. "Have CSU run prints," I said automatically, fighting the irrational urge to wipe my hands on my slacks. Nowak's expression didn't change, but I noticed a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Already did. Nothing, not even partials. And Alex..." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "The lab says the binding isn't cowhide. Initial tests suggest it's human skin. Ancient, tanned and preserved, using techniques that haven't been practiced for centuries." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach, but kept my face neutral. The station had a betting pool on when I'd finally show emotion on a case. I wasn't about to let a creepy book break my streak. I took the diary back to my desk, clearing a space among the scattered crime scene photos and half-empty coffee cups. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it carefully. The pages were thick, yellowish, and had an uneven texture unlike modern paper. The first entry was dated October 2nd, 12 days before our first murder. The handwriting was elegant but strange, the letters formed with an old-fashioned precision that reminded me of historical documents I'd seen in museums. And the ink, it was dark brown rather than black, with a peculiar sheen that caught the fluorescent office lighting. "The woman with the red door will be first. She keeps birds and talks too much. She whispers about the shadows she sees at the edge of town, the ones that move against the wind. She tells others about the dreams of the old place before it burned. I will silence her and take her sight, for she has seen what she shouldn't. The feather is her judgment, her birds will join the others." A chill ran up my spine. Marjorie Phillips lived in the only house on Cedar Street with a red door. She was known for her voliere of exotic birds and her habit of gossiping. According to her sister during the initial interview, Marjorie had been having strange dreams lately and had mentioned seeing shadows moving around the ruins of the Everett place, the same burned house where this diary had been found. I flipped through my case notes to double-check. Yes, there it was in my own handwriting. Marjorie's sister had mentioned it almost as an afterthought as she was leaving, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She kept saying something was wrong with the old Everett house, said she could see shadows moving there at night, even though no one's lived there since the fire. I told her she was being silly. These details hadn't been released to the public. No mention of missing birds had made it into the press reports. Only the killer would know. I kept reading, my stomach tightening with each page. The second entry described Thomas Garvey with uncomfortable accuracy. His late-night habits in the garage, the way he watches from windows when he thinks no one notices. The third and fourth murders were similarly documented, with details only the killer could know. But it was what came next that froze the blood in my veins. December 1st. The policeman who smells of cigarettes and coffee. His neck is thick, and he struggles to breathe when he sleeps. The mark will go on his chest, above the heart that betrayed him years ago when the dark-haired woman left him. He carries her picture still, tucked behind his badge where he thinks no one notices. The mark will match the tattoo on his left shoulder, the one he got in the Navy when he thought he was brave. His badge will not protect him. His gun will turn against him, wielded by trusted hands. My blood froze in my veins. Detective Sergeant Louis Anthony Mendez. Lou, my partner of 6 years, a 20-year veteran with sleep apnea and a history of minor heart problems. The man who kept his ex-wife Maria's photo hidden behind his badge. The man with the Navy anchor tattoo on his left shoulder, a tattoo I'd seen only once at the department picnic 3 summers ago, when he'd finally relented to playing volleyball and changed into a tank top. The man who'd saved my life during the North Side drug bust gone wrong, taking a bullet in the vest that would have caught me in the neck. The man who brought me black coffee and cinnamon donuts every Monday without fail, who knew without asking when I'd been up all night with a case, who covered for me when my father's Alzheimer's took a turn for the worse last year. And I needed time off without the department gossip mill turning it into a story. Lou, whose daughter was getting married in February, he'd already asked me to help him shop for an appropriate father of the bride outfit that won't make me look like an old cop. I slammed the book shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. The leather cover seemed to pulse beneath my fingers like something alive. I shoved it into my desk drawer, turned the key with trembling hands, and then, for good measure, jammed the key into my pocket so deeply it scratched my thigh through the fabric. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed drawer. A headache pounded behind my eyes, and the fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. Something tickled my upper lip, a nosebleed. I hadn't had one since I was a child. That night, I dreamt of the Everett house before it burned. In my dream, I walked its hallways, though I'd never been inside when it still stood. I knew exactly which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck in humid weather. I knew the house had been built in 1887 by a man who'd made his fortune in railroad construction and lost it all in a single night of cards. I knew the attic had a small window that faced west, toward the setting sun, and that something had lived in that attic for a very long time. Something that was not, had never been, human. I woke up sweating, tangled in my sheets, my alarm clock blinking 3:17 a.m. The next morning, I pulled the diary out again, determined to find something. A fingerprint, a hair, some DNA trace the lab had missed. My analytical mind refused to accept what my instincts were screaming, that this book was something impossible, something outside the realm of rational investigation. That's when I noticed it, a new entry written in what appeared to be fresh, still glistening blood. The metallic scent hit me immediately, making my stomach lurch. She thinks she can stop it. She cannot. What is written must come to pass. The wheel turns just as it did before, just as it will again. She is the hand now, as others were before her. The instrument changes, but the music remains. The handwriting was different from previous entries, more angular, more rushed, and with a cold shock of recognition that sent adrenaline coursing through my system, I realized why it looked familiar. The loops of the E's, the distinctive cross of the T's, the slight rightward slant. I'd seen this handwriting every day for 15 years, on countless reports, notes, and forms. It was mine. I had the blood analyzed privately, calling in a favor from Dr. Natalie Chen at the state lab, a former classmate who owed me after I helped clear her brother of theft charges last year. I told her it was for an unrelated case, gave her a false case number. For the first time in my career, I was falsifying evidence, manipulating the chain of custody. The results came back 3 days later. Human blood, type A, B negative. Rare, found in less than 1% of the population, the same type as all 4 victims. What I didn't tell Natalie was that it was also my blood type. A coincidence, surely. It had to be. I ran more tests. Carbon dated the paper and binding. The results came back inconclusive with an error message indicating anomalous organic composition. I had the ink from the original entries analyzed. Organic compound with traces of hemoglobin, carbon, and an unidentified substance the lab equipment couldn't process. I even consulted discreetly with Professor Elliot Chambers from the anthropology department at State University, who specialized in ancient texts. This binding technique hasn't been used since the 16th century, he told me over coffee, his fingers hovering above the cover but never quite touching it. I noticed he kept wiping his hands on his pants, though the cafe table was clean. And these symbols, they resemble certain occult traditions, but don't quite match any known system. Where did you say you found this? I lied. Told him it was evidence in a cold case. He nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the diary with an expression I couldn't quite place. When I called him the next day with follow-up questions, his secretary said he'd taken an unexpected sabbatical. I became obsessed with the diary. I slept in my office, the couch cushions imprinted with my body shape after nights of restless half-sleep. I read and reread the entries, trying to find clues, patterns, anything that might lead me to the killer before December 1st, before Lou became the next victim. My desk disappeared under stacks of research. Occult symbolism, rare blood disorders, historical accounts of serial killers, psychological profiles. I stopped going home entirely. My fridge contained nothing but expired yogurt. My plants had all died. My father's care facility called twice, wondering why I'd missed my weekly visits. I told them I was working a big case. My father wouldn't remember I'd been there anyway. The walls of my office became a conspiracy board. Red string connecting photos, notes, timelines. Other officers started avoiding me. I heard whispers. Detective Reeves is losing it. The machine is breaking down. Only Lou still brought me coffee, still asked me how I was doing, genuine concern in his tired eyes. I assigned him protective detail, Officer Jenkins and Rodriguez, our best uniformed cops, working in alternating shifts. Told Lou about the threats but not about the diary. How could I explain that? How could I tell him I'd found a supernatural ledger of death that had somehow selected him as its next victim? How could I admit that I was beginning to suspect that I myself might be the instrument of his destruction? I don't need babysitters, Alex, he argued in the break room, his coffee mug. World's best dad, a Father's Day gift from his daughter, clutched tightly in his weathered hands. These rookies should be out catching our killer, not watching me take a piss. They're not rookies and it's not negotiable, I said, my tone harsher than intended. The lack of sleep was making me irritable, fraying my usual composure. This killer is escalating, and now we have a direct threat against an officer. Lou laughed it off, said he wasn't afraid of some psycho with a bird fetish. The old Lou bravado, the same attitude that had gotten him through 2 divorces and a bullet to the chest. I've got my Glock and 20 years of dealing with Millhaven's worst, he said, patting his service weapon. Besides, you really think this nut job is coming after a fat old cop when there are prettier victims out there? But I saw the worry in his eyes, the slight tremor in his left hand as he set down his mug, the way his right hand instinctively moved to his heart when I mentioned the threat, directly above the spot where the diary had specified the mark would go. And I noticed something else. A small photo frame on his desk that hadn't been there before. His daughter in her graduation cap and gown. Lou was preparing, just in case. On November 28th, 3 days before the predicted date, I woke up at my desk to find the diary open. I was certain I'd locked it away before I'd fallen asleep. A new entry had appeared. She fights against the inevitable. The wheel turns. The shadow grows longer. The policeman will die, and she will be there to see it. The words were written in what looked like dried blood, flaking at the edges. But what disturbed me most was that I recognized the handwriting now. It was mine. I checked the security footage, hands shaking as I navigated the digital archives on my computer. The timestamp read November 27th, 2300 to 400 hours. No one had entered my office. The door remained closed, the hallway empty except for the occasional patrol officer making rounds. The camera showed me sleeping at my desk, case files spread out beneath my cheek, my computer screen a blue glow on my face. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the same time I'd woken from my dream about the Everett house, my body suddenly went rigid. Then I sat upright, my movements unnaturally fluid, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. My eyes were open but strangely vacant, pupils dilated so wide that my irises were barely visible rings of color. The footage showed me reaching for my desk drawer key with precise movements, unlocking it, pulling out the diary. I opened it to what appeared to be a blank page, reached for my letter opener, and then nothing. The next 4 minutes and 17 seconds of footage were missing, replaced by static and digital artifacts. Corrupted data, according to Mitch in the IT department, who couldn't explain why only that specific segment was affected when the rest of the night's footage was intact. When the image returned at 3:21:34 a.m., I was asleep again, slumped over my desk in the exact same position as before. The diary was back in the drawer, the key in my pocket. But now, a thin line of dark liquid, too dark to identify on the grainy security footage, trailed from the corner of my mouth to my collar. I started losing time after that. Blackouts. Moments where I'd find myself standing somewhere with no memory of how I got there. Once, I came to in the evidence room, holding a bag containing the black feathers from the crime scenes, though I had no reason to be reviewing that evidence. Another time, I woke up in my car, parked outside Thomas Garvey's house, engine still running, a full hour missing from my memory. The digital clock on my dashboard read 3:17 a.m. The worst was when I regained awareness in my bathroom at home, a place I hadn't been in days, having practically moved into the station. I was standing over the sink, methodically washing red from my hands, the water swirling pink down the drain. I told myself it was paint, or maybe wine. I didn't own any paint. I don't drink wine. There was a smear of the same substance on my cheek. In the mirror, my eyes looked wrong somehow, darker, with flecks of amber I'd never noticed before. Behind me, reflected in the mirror, but not actually present when I turned to look, I thought I saw a dark figure standing in the shower, its edges blurring into the steam. December 1st arrived. I kept Lou in my sight all day. As night fell, I suggested we both stay at the station. Safety in numbers, I said. He agreed, but around midnight, the call came in. Another body. We had to go. The scene was at the old mill by the river, a crumbling brick structure from the town's industrial heyday, abandoned since the 70s when the textile industry collapsed. Teenagers used it for drinking parties. Homeless people occasionally sought shelter there during winter months. As we approached the abandoned building, its silhouette stark against the night sky. I felt a strange calm descend over me, like sliding into ice water, the initial shock giving way to a numbing peace. My hand kept touching my service weapon, almost of its own accord. The weight of my Sig Sauer P226 felt different somehow, heavier, more insistent against my hip. The night air was unnaturally still, no insects chirping, no distant traffic sounds, just the soft lapping of the river against its banks and our footsteps on the gravel path. Something fluttered overhead, a large bird, too big for the local fauna. Its wingspan momentarily blotted out a section of stars. "You okay, partner?" Lou asked, his breath visible in the cold night air, forming ghostly patterns that seemed to linger longer than they should. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating his concerned face. I noticed he'd missed a spot shaving that morning, a small patch of silver stubble beneath his left ear. Such a human detail, such a Lou thing. "Fine," I said, but my voice sounded distant, even to me, like hearing myself through water, like someone else was using my vocal cords, my tongue, my lips. I could taste copper in my mouth. I realized, with detached curiosity rather than alarm, that I couldn't feel my fingertips anymore, nor my toes. My body was present, walking, breathing, functioning, but I was retreating, shrinking into some small corner of my own mind, watching as something else took up the space I was vacating. Inside the mill, shadows danced across crumbling brick walls. Our flashlight beams cut through decades of dust and neglect. No body, no signs of disturbance. And then Lou's radio crackled, the dispatcher calling to say they'd received an anonymous tip, redirecting us to a boathouse half a mile downstream. "Probably a prank," Lou said, turning to leave, "but we should check it out." I followed him out, watched his broad back as he walked ahead of me toward our car. The moon was full, casting everything in a silvery glow that made the world look like an old photograph. I don't remember drawing my gun. I don't remember disengaging the safety with a practiced thumb movement. I don't remember following Lou through the trees that lined the path back to where we'd parked. My footsteps unnaturally silent on the carpet of pine needles and decaying leaves. But I do remember the sudden weight of the diary in my jacket pocket, a weight that shouldn't have been there because I'd left it locked in my desk drawer at the station, triple-checked the lock before we'd left. Even asked Officer Rodriguez to stand guard outside my office door. The diary pulsed against my ribs like a second heart, each beat synchronizing with my own until I couldn't tell which rhythm originated from my chest and which from the book. It radiated heat, warming my skin through the layers of clothing. I felt it calling to me, not with words but with sensations, hunger, anticipation, an ancient patience finally nearing its conclusion. My free hand moved to my pocket, fingers tracing the embossed symbol on the cover through the fabric of my jacket. The motion felt ritualistic, practiced, though I'd never done it before. Or had I? Suddenly I wasn't sure. Memories that weren't mine crowded my consciousness. Hands writing in the diary by candlelight. Different hands across different centuries, different bodies serving the same purpose. The instrument changes, but the music remains. Lou turned when he heard me stop walking. "What's wrong?" he asked. I pulled out the diary, opened it to the newest entry. My hands were steady now, surgeon steady, though part of me was screaming inside a locked room in my own mind. The page appeared blank under the harsh beam of my flashlight. "What's that?" Lou asked, stepping closer, the gravel crunching under his boots. "Something from the case?" "Nothing here," Lou said, squinting at it over my shoulder. his breath warm against my cheek. "Just an empty page. Alex, you're scaring me. You haven't been yourself lately." But I could see the words clearly, glistening wetly in the moonlight, appearing letter by letter as if an invisible hand were writing them in real time. "December 1st, it ends tonight. He will fall by the water's edge, betrayed by the one he trusts. His blood will complete the circle begun centuries ago when the first diary was bound in human skin. The mark above his heart will become a gateway, and then she will finally understand. She was never the detective. She was always the instrument. We have waited so long for a vessel this perfect. I fought against it. I swear I did. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, trying to scream a warning. I tried to throw the gun away, to turn it on myself instead. But my body was no longer mine to command. Something else was in control, had been for weeks, maybe longer. I felt my finger tighten on the trigger, the pressure increasing with mechanical precision. "Partner?" Lou's voice seemed to come from very far away, echoing down a long tunnel. He reached out, his hand moving in slow motion toward my shoulder. The moonlight caught his wedding band. He still wore it, though his second marriage had ended 8 years ago. The gold gleamed briefly, like a final wink of light. His eyes widened as he saw something in my face change. I know what he saw because I'd seen it myself in the mirror, my pupils expanding until they swallowed the iris, something ancient and hungry looking out through what used to be my eyes. "Alex, this isn't you," he whispered, and for a split second I broke through. "Run!" I managed to choke out, the word garbled and strained. "Lou, run!" The gunshot echoed across the water, startling a flock of ravens from the trees. They rose in a black cloud against the moon, their wings beating a rhythm that matched the words now writing themselves in Lou's blood across the blank page of the diary. "The vessel is ready. The gateway opens. We return." They found me the next morning, sitting by Lou's body at the river's edge. The water had turned rust-colored where it lapped against the shore, carrying traces of him downstream. I was perfectly still, my back straight, hands folded neatly in my lap. The diary was open on my lap, a new entry written in still wet blood. Lou's blood. But I wasn't the one who had written it. Not really. State police said I hadn't moved when they arrived, hadn't acknowledged their commands to put my hands up, hadn't reacted when they tackled me to the ground and cuffed me. I just stared straight ahead, my eyes fixed on something they couldn't see. The officer who read me my rights said it was like arresting a mannequin. I have no memory of any of this. My recollection resumes in the interrogation room at the state police barracks. A sterile box with gray walls and a two-way mirror that reflected my hollow-eyed stare. I was still wearing my clothes from the night before. Lou's blood dried in dark patterns across my shirt front. They'd taken my gun, my badge, my shoelaces, but no one had thought to search inside my jacket pocket. The diary was still there, warm against my ribs, humming with satisfaction. The interrogation lasted 14 hours. I said nothing. What was there to say? That an ancient blood-bound book had possessed me? That I'd become the puppet of some entity that fed on violence and fear? That even now I could feel it slithering through my consciousness, tasting my thoughts, feeding on my guilt? They showed me the evidence, GSR, on my hands. My fingerprints, only mine, on the murder weapon. Security footage from the station showing me removing my service weapon from the lockup, though I had no memory of doing so. Lou's blood under my fingernails, on my clothes. The diary itself, which they'd finally discovered and bagged as evidence. dismissing it as some kind of twisted journal I'd been keeping, a record of my crimes, proof of premeditation. In my holding cell, they let me keep a journal, standard procedure for those awaiting psychological evaluation. The paper is cheap, the pen has a soft, flexible tip that couldn't harm anyone. I've been writing everything down, trying to make sense of it all, trying to warn someone, anyone. The cell is 8 feet by 10 feet. Concrete walls painted institutional beige, scratched with the desperate markings of previous occupants. A steel toilet sink combination in the corner. A thin mattress on a metal frame bolted to the floor. One small window, set high in the wall, reinforced with wire mesh between the panes. Through it, I can see a patch of sky that changes from blue to grey to black and back again as the days pass. My cellmate is a woman named Eliza Holt, arrested for assaulting her boyfriend. She claims he was possessed, that his eyes turned black just before he tried to strangle her. No one believes her. She talks in her sleep, mumbling about shadows that move against the light and birds with human faces. Sometimes, when she doesn't think I'm watching, she traces symbols on the concrete floor with her fingertip. Symbols that look remarkably like the one on the diary's cover. Last night, I woke to a strange scratching sound. Eliza was asleep, her back to me, her breathing deep and regular. The sound came from my journal, which I'd left on the small metal desk bolted to the wall. In the dim light filtering through the window, I could see the pen moving across the paper by itself, forming words in a precise, elegant script that was nothing like my hasty scrawl. I watched, paralyzed, as the ink darkened, thickened, transformed into something that glistened wetly in the moonlight. New words appeared on the page, written in what looks like dried blood. You were chosen because you were perfect, methodical, observant, patient. Your mind maps connections others cannot see. Your hands are steady, your resolve unbreakable. The perfect vessel, the perfect witness, and now the perfect prisoner, trapped not just in that cell, but in your own mind, forced to watch as I continue my work through others. The diary never needed you specifically. There are so many vessels waiting to be filled, so many eyes to be taken, so many throats to open. Did you think it was coincidence that brought you to Millhaven, that assigned you to these cases, that led you to find me in the ashes of the old house? Nothing is coincidence. Everything is design. You have been mine since before you were born, Detective Alexandra Reeves. Your grandmother knew the old ways. She visited the Everett house as a girl. She touched the diary first. Blood calls to blood across generations. P.S. Your cellmate has such interesting dreams. I think she'll do nicely. Her hands are not as steady as yours, but her rage burns so much hotter. Watch how she looks at the guard with the lazy eye, the one who stares too long when she showers. He will be first. His eyes will be perfect additions to my collection. I tried to warn them this morning. Tried to tell the prison psychiatrist during our session, a balding man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. Dr. Weiss. He smells of peppermint and has a photo of twin boys on his desk. He doesn't wear a wedding ring, but has a tan line where one used to be. Recent divorce, probably. He takes detailed notes in a leather-bound notebook that makes my skin crawl with its similarity to the diary. I tried to explain that it's not over, that it was never about me or Lou or any of the victims. It's about the diary, that ancient, blood-soaked thing that's older than the town itself. Older, perhaps, than anything has a right to be. It has a purpose, a hunger, and it will keep finding those who can serve its needs. Detective Reeves, Dr. Weiss said gently, his pen pausing above his notepad. What you're describing is a classic externalization mechanism. By attributing your actions to a supernatural entity, you're attempting to reconcile your behavior with your self-image as a person who upholds justice. He didn't believe me. No one would. I saw it in his eyes, that mix of clinical interest and pity that medical professionals reserve for the delusional. How could he understand? He hasn't seen what I've seen, hasn't felt what I've felt, hasn't watched his own hands commit atrocities while his mind screamed uselessly from its prison. I tried to warn the guards about Eliza too, told them to watch her closely, especially around Officer Keene, the one with the slight lazy eye, the one who was found this morning in the staff bathroom with his throat cut and his eyes removed. No weapon recovered, no witnesses, just a single black feather clutched in his rigged hand. The lockdown alarm is blaring now. Red emergency lights flash in the hallway. I can hear boots on concrete, shouted orders, the metallic slide of weapons being readied. They'll come for Eliza soon, but they won't find her, just as they never found the diary after it was entered into evidence, disappearing somehow between the evidence locker and the forensic lab. But I know where both Eliza and the diary are. They're together now, in the old pipe tunnels beneath the prison, the ones mentioned in the building plans I studied during a case 3 years ago. She'll emerge miles away, beside the river that runs past Millhaven. The diary will guide her, and the killings will begin again. The irony doesn't escape me. I spent my career searching for killers, only to become one. I dedicated my life to bringing closure to victims' families, only to create new victims myself. I was so precise, so methodical, so certain that my analytical mind could solve any puzzle, untangle any mystery. I was so certain I was the one solving this case. I never realized until it was too late. I wasn't hunting the monster. I was its pen. And now, sitting in this cell while chaos erupts around me, I feel the familiar weight returning, that pressure behind my eyes, that copper taste in my mouth, that strange warmth spreading through my limbs. My vision is beginning to darken around the edges. My hands have stopped trembling. I can hear whispers in a language I shouldn't understand, but somehow do. They left me this journal, this cheap paper and soft-tipped pen, a harmless outlet for a prisoner awaiting trial. But they don't understand. Anything can become a conduit when the right words are written. Any ink can become blood when the right hand guides it. Any page can become a doorway when the right eyes read it. And you, whoever you are, reading these words right now, you've just opened that door. You've invited it in. Check your hands. Are they still yours to command? Look in the mirror. Are those still your eyes looking back? Do you taste copper on your tongue? The wheel turns. The instrument changes. But the music, the terrible, beautiful music, remains the same. Turn the page if you dare. The diary is waiting for a new hand to guide it. For the record, I am Detective Alexandra Reeves, badge number 4471, Millhaven Police Department. I am of sound mind and body as I write this final entry. And if you're reading this, I'm so very sorry for what comes next. Story 8. The Execution That Never Ended. I don't expect you to believe me. If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't believe it either. But 37 years working at cold water maximum security, feeling that ancient limestone chill seep into my marrow, Hearing the midnight whispers bounce off scarred cell walls taught me that some things in this world don't follow the rules we think they do. Some things linger long after they should be gone, like breath condensing on cold metal. It's been 9 years since I retired from cold water. 9 years since I last walked those concrete corridors, heard the metallic clang of cell doors, breathed in that peculiar blend of industrial disinfectant and human desperation. But I still wake up at night, sweat-soaked and gasping, because in my dreams I'm back there, back where it all started to go wrong. The execution of Martin Wade Holcomb, February 17th, 1986. I remember it was unusually cold that night, even for Michigan in February. The kind of cold that finds the cracks in walls, that seeps through layers of clothing and settles in your bones. Wind howled around Coldwater's watchtowers like something wounded, and the ancient heating system wheezed and groaned beneath our feet, pumping out tepid air that did nothing against the chill that seemed to radiate from the very concrete. I was 32 then, 7 years into my career as a corrections officer at Coldwater, young enough to still believe the system worked, old enough to have seen that sometimes it didn't. Holcomb was different from our usual inmates. Quiet, educated. He'd been a high school chemistry teacher before he methodically poisoned 6 people over the span of 2 years. His victims were seemingly random: a local shopkeeper, a former student, a woman who lived 3 doors down. The papers called him the Michigan mixologist because of the complex chemical compounds he used. His case had been a media sensation, the kind of grisly fascination that overtakes small communities when something unthinkable happens in their midst. I wasn't assigned to death row. Michigan abolished capital punishment back in 1847, but Holcomb had been convicted in Ohio, where some of his crimes took place. He was only transferred to Coldwater temporarily, while Ohio's Lucasville facility underwent renovations. The execution was set to take place at Lucasville once he was transferred back. But something happened that night in February, something that changed everything. There was a snowstorm, you see. The transfer had to be delayed. And Holcomb, well, he had other ideas. I was working the night shift when the call came through. Holcomb had gotten into a confrontation with another inmate and a guard during evening meal distribution. By the time I arrived at his cell, 2 officers were already restraining him, but something was wrong. The other inmate, a lifer named Desmond James, was convulsing on the floor. He spit something at him, one of the guards shouted. Some kind of powder. James died before medical could get there, his face frozen in a rictus of agony, eyes bulging, foam at the corners of his mouth. Holcomb just smiled, that same placid smile he wore in all his courtroom photos. What happened next violated every protocol in the book. The warden, Carter was his name, Douglas Carter, made a decision. If Holcomb could kill a man while awaiting transfer for his own execution, he was too dangerous to wait. Carter had connections. Calls were made. Paperwork was backdated. And in the secure basement level of Coldwater, in a room that officially didn't exist, they rigged up what they needed. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was just a regular CO, not part of the special response team. But Carter needed bodies, people he could trust, and my supervisor volunteered me, said I had a level head. I still remember the makeshift execution chamber, an old storage room cleared out, a gurney brought in from the infirmary, the smell of fresh paint trying to cover decades of mildew, layered with the copper penny tang of fear and antiseptic. the harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered like dying insects, casting strange, elongated shadows on the cinder block walls. Shadows that seemed to move independently of their owners, stretching and contracting with each electrical pulse. Holcomb didn't fight when they brought him in. If anything, he seemed amused by the whole affair. Improvisational justice, he called it. He lay down on the gurney without being asked, extended his arms for the restraints like he was offering them as a gift. "You know," he said, looking directly at me as they prepared the IV, "this isn't going to work." Those were the last words he spoke. At least, the last ones anyone heard. The procedure was botched from the start. The prison doctor had limited experience with lethal injections. The fourth kept collapsing. Holcomb's veins wouldn't cooperate. When they finally managed to start the drip, something went wrong with the mixture of chemicals. Holcomb began to seize. His body arched against the restraints, his face contorted in pain. It took 18 minutes for him to die. 18 minutes of watching a man struggle against his restraints, his body fighting what his mind had accepted. The room went cold, so cold we could see our breath. The lights flickered wildly, and just before Holcomb took his final breath, all the lights in the room went out completely. For 10 seconds, we stood in total darkness. When the lights came back on, Holcomb was still, eyes open, that same placid smile on his lips. The doctor pronounced him dead at 11:42 p.m. We were all sworn to secrecy. Official records would show that Holcomb was successfully transferred back to Ohio the following week. A small notice in the papers would announce his execution at Lucasville. No one outside that room would ever know what really happened. But something did happen in that room. Something changed in Coldwater that night. I noticed it first in the light fixtures, the constant flickering. Maintenance checked them a dozen times, replaced bulbs, rewired entire sections. Nothing helped, especially in the wing where Holcomb had been held. A flicker here, a momentary darkness there, like a pulse, like something breathing. Then came the cold spots, patches of air so frigid they would stop you in your tracks. You'd walk down a corridor that should be 70 degrees and suddenly hit a pocket of air that felt like a meat locker. Always moving, those cold spots. Never in the same place twice. The sound started about a month after the execution. Footsteps in empty hallways, not the heavy tread of guard boots or the shuffling gait of inmates, but precise measured steps, like a man pacing a classroom. Cell doors closing when all inmates were locked down. The metallic echo reverberating through the cell blocks with a deliberate finality. The soft rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on metal, that would follow guards on their rounds, always maintaining the same distance, always stopping when you turned to look, only to resume the moment you continued walking. But it was the disappearances that couldn't be explained away. The first was Wilson Torres, an inmate serving 15 years for armed robbery. Not a model prisoner, but not particularly troublesome either. On April 3rd, 1986, Torres simply wasn't in his cell during morning count. The cell was locked, the bars intact, his belongings untouched. The security tapes showed nothing, just static during the hours he would have had to leave. The official report called it an escape, though no one could explain how. Search parties found nothing. Torres was never seen again. 2 months later, it happened again. Malcolm Reed vanished overnight from a different cell block. Then Charles Wyatt, 3 weeks after that. By the end of the year, 7 inmates had disappeared. No traces, No explanations. Just empty cells come morning. The administration tried to keep it quiet. Isolated incidents, they said. Security breaches they were investigating. But the inmates knew better. They started talking about Holcomb, about how he'd promised revenge on his last day, how he'd said he would take others with him when he went. He's collecting souls, one lifer told me when I found him praying in his cell at 3 a.m., making his own little prison on the other side. I didn't believe in ghosts, not then. But I did believe something was terribly wrong at Coldwater. In November of that year, we lost the first guard, Raymond Finch, 27 years old, 4 years on the job, working the night shift in the same wing where Holcomb had been held. His radio went silent at 2:17 a.m. The officer who went to check found his flashlight on the floor, still on, rolling gently back and forth as if just dropped. His keys, radio, and baton were still in place. Ray himself was gone. The security footage showed him walking his normal route, checking cells, marking his log. Then he pauses, looks up toward the corner of the corridor, toward the camera, and his expression changes. Not fear, exactly. More like recognition, like seeing someone you know in an unexpected place. He takes a step forward. His mouth forms words we couldn't make out, and then the video dissolves into static. When the image clears 10 seconds later, the hallway is empty except for the rolling flashlight. They brought in dogs, state police, FBI consultants. No one found a trace of Ray Finch, or of the other guard who disappeared 3 months later, or the nurse who vanished from the infirmary in mid-1987. By then, the rumors had spread beyond Coldwater's walls. Transfer requests piled up as guards tried to get reassigned. Inmates requested transfers too, some even asking for higher security facilities just to get out. The administration denied there was a problem. Accidents, they said, negligence, paperwork errors. But we all felt it, the growing presence in the prison, the sensation of being watched when no one was there, the whispers just at the edge of hearing, the shadows that moved against the light. I requested a transfer in late '87. They denied it. Again in '88. Denied. By '89, I'd stopped asking. Something told me I wouldn't be allowed to leave. Not by the administration, and not by whatever had taken root in Coldwater's walls. I started documenting everything, keeping my own log of cold spots, equipment malfunctions, strange sounds. I mapped the disappearances, looking for patterns. And I found one. A slow, methodical progression through the prison, cell block by cell block, almost like someone working through a list. In 1990, the disappearances reached the administrative offices. A secretary vanished, leaving nothing but a half-typed memo and a still warm cup of coffee. 2 weeks later, Assistant Warden Miles didn't show up for work. His car was in the parking lot. His office door was locked from the inside. When security broke it open, the room was empty. Warden Carter stepped down that month, cited health concerns. His replacement lasted 6 months before requesting a transfer. The next one made it a year. Through it all, the lights kept flickering. The cold spots wandered the corridors. The disappearances continued, slower now, more selective, but steady. 1 or 2 a year, always without witnesses, always without explanation. I learned to survive. I never worked alone. I avoided the coldest areas. I made sure someone always knew where I was. And I never ever mentioned Holcomb's name out loud within those walls. But at night, alone in the officers' break room, I would sometimes feel him. A pressure in the air, a presence just behind me, the sensation of breath on the back of my neck, though when I turned, no one was there. Once, only once, I thought I saw him, a reflection in the darkened window of a corridor at night, a figure standing behind me, wearing the same placid smile. When I spun around, the hallway was empty, but the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. I stayed at Coldwater for 22 more years after Holcomb's execution. 22 years of unexplained phenomena. 22 years of watching people disappear. The prison population dwindled as inmates were transferred out and new arrivals were diverted to other facilities. By the time I retired in 2016, Coldwater housed less than a third of its capacity. They closed it the following year, cited budget cuts and the aging facility. The official record shows all inmates were transferred successfully to other institutions. The official record lies. I was there for the final week. I watched as they tried to account for everyone, as they discovered gaps in their numbers that couldn't be explained. I saw the panic in the administrators' eyes as they realized they couldn't explain where everyone had gone. In the end, they fudged the numbers. They altered records. They made people disappear on paper who had already vanished in reality. And they sealed Coldwater's doors for the last time, locking whatever remained inside. I dream about it sometimes. The empty corridors, the flickering lights, the sound of footsteps following me down hallways that never end. In my dreams, I'm always searching for the missing, opening cell doors that should contain inmates, but finding only empty darkness. Sometimes in these dreams, I hear Holcomb's voice, that educated, precise tone like he's still teaching chemistry to disinterested teenagers. The conservation of mass, he explains from somewhere just behind me. Matter cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. I wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, heart pounding. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes my bedroom is cold, unnaturally cold, and the light on my bedside table flickers just once. I've never gone back to Coldwater. The complex still stands, abandoned now, slowly being reclaimed by nature. No one's repurposed it. No developer has tried to transform it into luxury condos or a shopping center, as happens with so many defunct institutions. It's as if everyone knows, instinctively, to leave it alone. But I check the missing persons reports for the county every week. Old habit, I suppose. Or maybe I'm looking for confirmation of what I already suspect, that whatever started that night in February 1986 didn't end when they closed the prison. Last month, a hiker vanished near the old Coldwater grounds. Search parties found nothing but his backpack, sitting neatly in the middle of the access road leading to the main gate, as if he'd set it down deliberately before walking into the complex. The news didn't mention the temperature drop reported by the search team, or the strange electrical interference that damaged their equipment, or the sounds like distant cell doors closing that 3 separate searchers reported hearing from inside the abandoned building. They won't find him. I know that much. He belongs to Coldwater now, to Holcomb. Sometimes I wonder if I do too, if my years there marked me somehow, if one day I'll feel that cold spot form around me, see the lights flicker and hear that educated voice say, "It's time." I keep the lights on at night now, all of them, but it doesn't matter. They still flicker sometimes,